Today, we're going to cover some of the caving and cave diving disasters that we have covered on this channel. Be sure to subscribe for more videos like this. Sterkfontein is one of the most important areas for paleontology and anthropology research. Otherwise known as Strong Spring, this remote African cave system is a treasure trove of ancient humans and our distant ancestors. But one brave explorer fell prey to Sterkfontein's death trap: underwater caves that have been killing humans for millennia. Before we dive into the video, I want to take a moment to thank all of you who have subscribed to this channel. Our subscriber rate has grown from 8% to 13%, which is truly amazing. If you're new here, simply click the subscribe button, like this video, and hit the bell icon to stay updated on our latest uploads. Now let's get into the video. We're covering the race against time to rescue a Sterkfontein cave diver that turned into a marathon that shocked the caving world back in the 80s. Sterkfontein, otherwise known as Strong Spring, is a limestone cave system at the World Heritage Site known as the Cradle of Humankind. The Cradle of Humankind is located 31 miles north of Johannesburg, which is the 26th largest city in the world and the capital of the wealthiest province in South Africa. The Cradle of Humankind was created to study the area and to protect the land. It's a haven for paleontologists and archaeologists. Paleontologists study fossils to uncover how animals lived in different periods of time, and archaeologists study the ancient cultures of our ancestors. Researchers in the region are most interested in researching hominins, or the branch of evolution that humans came from. Research at Cradle of Humankind is mostly done in two caves, the Marapeng and Sterkfontein. The first human ape fossils found at the Cradle of Humankind were discovered in the Sterkfontein Caves in 1935 by Robert Broom, a medical doctor and paleontologist who made a number of valuable discoveries. In the Marapeng Cave, 92 different hominid species have been discovered. A single chamber in Sterkfontein, the Dinaledi chamber, houses over 1,500 fossils from the Homo naledi species of humans. No other site in Africa has as many fossils from any one species. In total, over 90,000 fossils have been unearthed there, and roughly 40% of the world's ancestral fossils have been found exclusively at Cradle of Humankind. Out of the two caves, Marapeng is open to visitors with a museum that showcases the skeletal fossils and the ancient tools that were used by our ancestors. The museum also has a tour of Marapeng that extends into Sterkfontein, and the tour also lets visitors see active excavations. The Sterkfontein, or Strong Spring Caves, are made of dolomitic limestone dating back over 20 million years. The dolomite portion of the cave dates back 2.58 billion years when the region was at the bottom of a sea, but the modern caves began forming when weak acids and rainwater were absorbed by the porous limestone, which eventually carved out tunnels and chambers. Some of the spots where rainfall collected on the surface became massive potholes, and animal bones built up at the bottom of these vertical shafts after they unknowingly fell in or died and were thrown in over the years. Different portions of the cave have different entrances, including a massive hole leading to the big cave portions, while the Windgat portion has a narrow 40 feet deep chimney hole for its entrance. The Windgat portion of Sterkfontein has some of the most impressive speleothems in the caves, with massive stalagmites, huge flowstone, curvy curtains, and crystallized ferns. Wildlife species also inhabit the cave, including the petiolata wasps that swarm on the cave ceilings and create colonies much like ants with special social roles. The caves at Sterkfontein were first used as limestone mines almost half a century before Robert Broom uncovered the first ape fossils at the Cradle of Humankind. The limestone was converted to lime, which was used to process gold. Dynamite blasts from the miners eventually revealed the entrance to the cave system. In 1890, the first non-human fossils were discovered in the caves. World War II put a halt to the excavation at Sterkfontein, but Dr. Broom came back later to find Mrs. Pless, a nearly intact skull from the species Australopithecus africanus, which was only recently redacted when new research uncovered the skull was from a male. While a number of important discoveries have been made at Sterkfontein, the cave has also been the site of international disasters. In 1984, the Sterkfontein Caves were world-renowned, but they weren't under as much control as they are now. It would be another 15 years before the caves got protected status under the new governing body of the Cradle of Humankind. In recent years, South Africa has also enacted laws to preserve its caves, making it illegal to harm or take portions of caves without permission. That year, in 1984, 29-year-old Peter Verhuesel explored the cave with a group of two his friends. They were going cave diving in the cradle of humankind. In cave diving, there's one important rule: never let go of the guideline. Some guidelines are attached to the rock itself to provide a permanent safety measure for anyone diving in the cave. The only reasonable time anyone would let go of these lines would be during missions to lay new guidelines in the first place. This task can't be done by novice or even advanced divers. Permanent guidelines in underwater caves should only be set by experts in the field with proper equipment. More commonly, divers will use distance lines, which can be held in the hand and clipped onto scuba gear for added safety. The other end can be attached to a surface marker buoy for divers traveling roughly 160 feet, while exploration reels used for official or expert survey work can be bulky and hold over 2,000 feet of line. Cave divers usually need multiple reels that need to be attached to checkpoints. The guidelines themselves are made of white nylon, which provides the best visibility in low light and enough strength and buoyancy for most situations. Some deep cave dives require divers to map out the placement of various temporary guidelines. Teams will make knots or use line markers to mark different distances along the route. Cave reels use adjustable drag so that the line can be recovered or laid down at swimming speed. Divers of any experience level should carry safety spools which can be used in an emergency, like if the line breaks. Cave divers have to keep tension on their own guidelines at all times to avoid snagging the line on sharp rocks or wrapping the line around other divers. Divers laying permanent lines have to be aware of the space to ensure the line is visible at all times. Sometimes, inexperienced divers will fit through a narrow hole and lay down guiding line through the hole, but if they're skinny or smaller in stature, they might not realize that other people can't follow the line. They also might not realize how the passage travels in the opposite direction. If the hole is too narrow to pass through for most people, or if the return trip is too dangerous, these amateur lines become line traps, and they can easily kill. On September 29, 1984, Peter Verhuesel followed behind his two friends. He wasn't as experienced as his friends, so he should have been in the middle where the two could watch him, but they kept him in the back, trailing behind. Unfortunately, Peter ignored the safety rules for cave divers. He only brought a single light and one scuba tank or self-contained underwater breathing apparatus, and he only brought one light source. It's always smart to carry at least one smaller emergency tank, if not a full-sized backup. Small emergency tanks can be placed on the arm, back, side, or the stomach of divers. These units are separated from the main tank, and divers have to activate the emergency tanks so that they don't drain during normal use. Of course, this was the 80s when equipment wasn't as good, and the dangers of caving weren't broadcast to the whole world online. Peter and his friends were diving in the ancient recesses of the Sterkfontein Caves when Peter let go of the guideline. Without a guideline of his own, he took off to explore a side passage. His friends waited. Unable to speak underwater, they eventually signaled in silence. One by one, they followed in his direction. Darkness surrounded them with only algae-covered rock in all directions. After a few heart-pounding minutes, they found Peter and took him back to the guideline. A few minutes later, and Peter's adventurous side took over once more. He veered off from the guideline and his fins kicked silt up as he swam into a dark tunnel. His friends took chase and grabbed him, nearly pulling him back to the path and back to the tenuous safety of the bright white nylon rope. They kept advancing through the flooded ventricles of the cradle of humankind. Peter felt more confident after being found twice, and, without signaling to his friends, he swam off a third time into the unknown. This time, his friends kept swimming. Eventually, they paused and turned around to find Peter had vanished. After the distance they had traveled, there were many passages he could have gone through. So they tried waiting. They kept waiting, and after uncomfortable minutes greeted only by the sounds from their own eerie breathing and their ever-increasing heart rate pounding in their ears. After they waited for what felt like eternity in the flooded tubes below an African fossil field, the two other divers grabbed their safety spools and backtracked. The two divers couldn't move quickly because their safety guidelines had to be accounted for. They couldn't let out too much at once. They couldn't take sharp turns, and they had to be wary of each other to avoid getting tangled. Eventually, they got warning signs that their oxygen was low. The two friends had no choice but to head back to the surface. After a frantic escape from the strong spring, they immediately called for rescue teams. Heroic rescuers made the dive. Nothing. They ventured deeper with more guidelines to explore the side routes. No sign of Peter. He had simply disappeared. Eventually, hope ran out for finding their friend alive, but they kept trying and switched the focus to a recovery effort. After 6 weeks of searching, the bulk of the rescue team packed up and went home. A few divers weren't deterred by the main operation ending. They kept diving. Eventually, they found a hole leading out of the main cave which lead out of the sump and onto walkable pathway. They found footprints in the muddy waters of this deep, dark crevice. In an island in the distance, they found Peter crumpled on the ground, dead. Peter Verhuesel joined the thousands of ancient humans who also died in the cave. An autopsy revealed he had survived 3 weeks in perpetual darkness. It wasn't oxygen or exposure that got him, but rather he died of starvation while desperately awaiting rescue. Nearby, they found a message in the sand Peter had scrawled addressed to his wife and his mother, where he wrote how much he loved them. In another sad twist to the story, the cradle of humankind closed the underground lake portion of the cave, so no surveyors can explore the depths of Sterkfontein, and the full depth of the cave, one of humanity's most important archaeological sites, remains unknown. Out of all of the possible caves, underwater caves like those at Sterkfontein are by far the most deadly. While rocks can collapse or people can get lost, there are way more dangers with diving, and it's nearly impossible to survive a mistake. Imagine a world of inky blackness, where sunlight is a far-off memory and silence reigns high. You're weightless, suspended in an alien landscape, surrounded by jagged rock formations that seem to stretch on forever. This isn't science fiction, it's the terrifying reality of cave diving. Cave diving isn't for the claustrophobic or faint of heart. It's an adventure reserved for the most daring explorers, those who crave the thrill of risking where few have dared to go. But beneath the allure lies a hidden danger, a constant dance with death in the inky embrace of the unknown. In 1973, a group of 8 friends arrived in Mount Gambier, Australia, for what seemed like a weekend of thrilling exploration. Their target? The Shaft, a natural wonder, a gaping sinkhole promising a glimpse into the hidden depths. For some, it was a chance to experience the serene and mystical beauty of the underwater world. For others, it was a test of their diving skills, a chance to push their limits. But what started as an adventurous escapade soon turned into a nightmare, and only 4 of them came back, a chilling story of human courage and the unforgiving power of nature. Join us as we delve into the harrowing tale of the 1973 Mount Gambier cave diving accident. We'll explore the world of cave diving, its beauty, and its perils. We'll meet the group of friends who embarked on this fateful journey, and we'll piece together the events that led to a tragedy that would forever change their lives. As we descend into the darkness alongside them, the suspense will build. Did they stray from the safe zone, lured by the thrill of discovery? Did a simple mistake turn their dive into a desperate fight for survival? The answers lie hidden within the depths of the shaft. We'll follow the agonizing rescue attempts, a race against time, and the ever-present danger of the cave itself. Get ready to dive into a true-life tale of fear that will grip you from start to finish, leaving you completely spellbound. Today, we're diving into the mysterious sinkhole known as the Shaft. It all started in 1938 on a farm near Allendale East, not too far from Mount Gambier. A team of workers is going about their day when, suddenly, one of their horses stumbles over a tiny hole. Curious, they investigate and discover it's actually the entrance to a massive sinkhole. In the mid-1960s, and a brave local diver decides to explore further. With rain enlarging the opening to about 0.8 meters wide, he squeezes through and enters the cave's enormous lake chamber, which spans 17 meters wide. Descending into the depths, he reaches a staggering 21 meters below the surface. The cave is just one of many deep solution features found in the limestone of southern Australia. Its main chamber stretches about 140 meters long and 80 meters wide. The water level sits about 7 meters below ground, and the opening widens significantly at this point. Below the surface, there's a rocky pile that drops down to at least 36 meters deep. There are tunnels, too. One heads northwest, reaching about 80 meters deep, while another heads east, going as deep as 124 meters. Because of its size and depth, divers and gear are lowered in separately using a hoist system. It's a challenging but fascinating dive into the unknown. The name The Shaft comes from the bright sunlight that shines into the cave's entrance on sunny days. In 1984, the Cave Divers Association of Australia, CDAA, research group created the first accurate map of the cavern. They found the chamber to be oval-shaped. Another exploration took place in June 1992, but the deepest parts were only surveyed and mapped in 2002-03. The eastern tunnel is blocked at around 57 meters deep and extends down to 124 meters before hitting a horizontal path, blocked by rocks. The exact lengths of the northwest and southwest tunnels are still unknown. They could stretch to the southern shores as part of a complex freshwater drainage system. Access to the shaft is restricted to divers accredited with the CDAA since it's on private land. On May 26, 1973, a group of 9 divers traveled to Mount Gambier in South Australia to explore the Shaft, a narrow 3-foot-wide sinkhole leading to a large underwater cavern. Known for its clear water and unique structure, it was a popular spot among divers. The group consisted of 8 divers: John H. Bockerman, Peter S. Burr, Christine M. Millett, Glenn Millett, Stephen Millett, Larry Reynolds, Gordon G. Roberts, and Robert J. Smith. Joan Harper, the 9th member, opted out of diving and stayed by the sinkhole, preparing soup and helping the group in other ways. The day before the accident, the group visited the farmhouse of B.V. Ashby, where they signed the guest book. They then completed a successful dive at the sinkhole, extending a line about 150 feet into the water. Their dive reached the rock pile, a central heap of limestone rubble located approximately 40 meters directly below the sinkhole entrance. After briefly exploring the area, they surfaced. With their line already set up, the group planned to return the next morning to continue exploring the cavern. On the morning of May 28th, the group returned to the sinkhole after refilling their cylinders in Mount Gambier. They quickly descended to the rock pile. According to reports from the divers, their plan was not to explore beyond the edge, a narrow and downward-sloping continuation of the cave on one side of the main chamber, far from the natural light shaft provided by the sinkhole opening. The rock pile was considered the safe boundary for recreational diving. The surrounding cavern was dark, unexplored, covered in loose silt and limestone rubble, and continued downward to depths where the effects of nitrogen narcosis become extreme if the breathing gas is not diluted by helium. Even at the depths of the rock pile perimeter, the effects of narcosis would have been significant, possibly impacting the judgment of the divers. During the initial descent, the 8 divers overlooked several important safety procedures. The shot line didn't reach all the way to the cavern floor, and there were no extra air tanks attached to it. Additionally, the divers didn't have proper air management strategies in place. They didn't pair up with specific diving partners and didn't use any safety guidelines. Glenn Millott mentioned that using separate lines for each diver would have been risky due to the confined space. Robert Smith, who had dived at the sinkhole multiple times before and had planned most of the dive, didn't expect the group members to venture as far into the cave as they did. With the help of former Chief Superintendent Wallace B. Budd, accounts from the 4 surviving divers were combined to understand what happened to the 4 victims. Smith, feeling the effects of nitrogen narcosis, signaled he was going back while at the rock pile's edge. Despite this, the group chose to keep exploring. Smith circled the rock pile for about 8 minutes, searching for animal bones before seeing Glenn Millett's torch coming back. Glenn, aware of his limited air, tried to signal Christine Millett about their time, but they got separated. Smith and Glenn surfaced together, finding Larry Reynolds already back. Shortly after, Peter Burr surfaced with very little air left in his tank. Knowing that the others had low air supplies, Glenn Millett quickly put on a spare tank and went back into the water. He descended to a depth of 225 feet, where the cliff began to drop off. There, he found Stephen Millett's torch and camera and noticed that a lot of silt had been stirred up, reducing visibility to almost zero. Glenn had to decompress and return to the surface. When he surfaced, an ambulance had arrived at the sinkhole. Peter Burr went back to the cavern once more, but found no one. At that point, they knew they were searching for bodies, not survivors. Towards the end of the planned dive, Christine Millett and Gordon Roberts tried to ascend quickly back to the surface, but they made a mistake. Instead of swimming upwards along the slope they came down, they went straight up, probably because they were worried about running out of air. They swam directly into a dome in the ceiling that had no way out. Larry Reynolds, another diver, saw their torches searching for an exit desperately before Roberts signaled that they were lost. Reynolds mentioned that Christine Millett and Gordon Roberts looked scared. This was the last time anyone saw them. Likely affected by nitrogen narcosis and with very poor visibility due to silt, they couldn't find a way out. They used up all their air and drowned. Their bodies were later found together beneath the dome in the ceiling they couldn't escape from. Reports suggest that Christine Millett and Gordon Roberts may have been holding each other, knowing they were about to die. Further into the cave and around the same time, one of the survivors reported seeing a member of their group swimming strongly downward. This was John Bockerman, who was likely affected by severe nitrogen narcosis and may not have realized he was swimming to his death. His body was found about 20 feet down from where he was last seen and was at the deepest point among the victims. The fourth victim, Stephen Millett, may have been spotted struggling beneath the cave ceiling shortly before the other divers surfaced. Although his torch and camera were found deep at the base of the rock pile, his body was discovered under an overhang at a depth of only 50 feet. There is little information about Stephen's final moments, but he was wearing a buoyancy vest, and being found under an overhang assume he was floating at the time of his death. A search of the cave by the Police Underwater Recovery Squad, going as deep as 200 feet, began on May 29, 1973, the day after the accident. However, it was a short search, and no bodies were found. The team realized they weren't fully prepared for such a dive, and Chief Inspector Wallace Budd described the operation as a learn-as-you-go exercise. A second attempt was made on May 30th, but it was also unsuccessful. The police search was then put on hold as the team sought naval expertise for the dive. However, the training for this expertise was expected to take several months. In January the following year, a documentary crew entered the sinkhole with permission from the landowners. After diving to a depth of 50 feet, they used strong lights to brighten the cave. While working, they noticed what seemed to be a person behind them. Upon closer inspection, they realized it was a body in a wetsuit. They immediately surfaced to report their findings. The next morning, police arrived and found the body floating under a ledge at the same depth. It was identified as Stephen Millett, and his body was retrieved. Police continued searching but found nothing else. The landowners, feeling uneasy with the bodies still on their property, seek help from an amateur diving team from Melbourne for recovery. But around the same time, the police diving team was also gearing up for recovery efforts. On 9 March 1974, R.G. Traynor and his team entered the shaft with better diving gear. At 185 feet deep, Traynor spotted a body below him, followed by another. These were Christine Millett and Gordon Roberts. Deeper, at 20 feet, they found John Bockerman's body under a ledge. Despite attempting to move it, Traynor couldn't due to limited air. The next day, recovery efforts resumed, but were called off due to murky water. After several more attempts, the bodies were found on the third day. Christine Millett and Gordon Roberts were recovered from 195 feet on 11th March 1974. The following day, efforts to retrieve Bockerman's body from 215 feet were halted due to narcosis. After a month's break, divers returned with a plan. They secured the body's location, rested a day, and then successfully recovered Bockerman's body on 9 April 1974, marking the end of a challenging 11-month recovery process. The cause of death for all 4 divers was determined to be a lack of air leading to drowning. In Stephen Millett's autopsy, 3 possible fatal injury modes were considered. Air embolism, caused by lung overpressure during ascent while holding the breath, was ruled out due to lack of detectable lung barotrauma. Breathing gas contamination was also ruled out. Evidence of diatom residue in the lung tissue indicated water entry before or after death, supporting drowning as the cause. The coroner concluded that the divers exceeded their bottom time, ran out of air, and died of hypoxia or lack of oxygen. Despite claiming experience, none were experienced in sinkhole diving and lacked safety precautions like a fail-safe return system or buddy system. No one took clear responsibility for dive planning and safety. The murky depths of the shaft eventually yielded their grim secret. Over a year of agonizing recovery efforts brought the bodies of the 4 lost divers back to the surface: Stephen and Christine Millett, Gordon Roberts, and John Bockerman. Their deaths sent shockwaves through the diving community, a stark reminder of the unforgiving nature of cave diving. The tragedy of the shaft wasn't just a story of lives lost, it was a wake-up call. Diving regulations in Australia were tightened, with a renewed attention on training, safety protocols, and a healthy respect for the dangers lurking beneath the surface. Today, the shaft stands as a silent monument to those who vanished within its depths. Deep underground, 2 friends, Martin and Roger, ventured into the depths, crawling and diving through a maze of dark tunnels. As spelunkers, they were driven by the hope of discovering a hidden chamber, a secret room nobody have ever seen before. However, their expedition took a harrowing turn when one of them disappeared without a trace, leaving the other haunted by fear. Let's uncover the harrowing events that unfolded in these treacherous tunnels. Ogof Agen Allwedd is the longest cave system on the Langatic Cliff, with more than 32.5 kilometers of passages. There are several circular routes that can be taken within the cave, but all trips begin with the short entrance series and the first boulder choke. You have to crawl through the long entrance passages, but most of the cave has large stream passages that are easy to explore and don't need any special equipment. The round trips in the cave include the Grand Circle, which goes along the main stream passage with 4 rock-obstructed passages, boulder chokes, and the Southern Stream Passage, which is long, wet, and tiring. There are also the outer and inner circles, which include Turkey Streamway with some special formations like gore pools. Each round trip takes more than 6 hours, and some parts of the cave can flood. The sump at the third boulder choke fills with water quickly, and in bad flood conditions, it's impossible to get through the second boulder choke and the narrow part of Turkey Streamway above Northwest Junction. Maytime and the lower mainstream also become inaccessible when it floods. Generally, Agen Allwedd has few formations. The cave is important because many bats roost there. Bats are strictly protected from being disturbed by the Wildlife and Countryside Act 1981, the Habitat Regulations 1994, and the EC Habitats Directive. It is a criminal offense to deliberately or recklessly disturb bats, so cavers should be careful not to cause any disturbance. Originally, people entered the cave through the Agen Allwedd entrance, but now there is a gated entrance through Ogof Agen. This new entrance avoids a difficult, narrow section, which is now blocked by a pillar. Keys are given to people with valid permits, and they must sign a book when entering the cave, stating the route they will take. Using carbide lamps is not allowed in the cave. Additional permits are needed for camping inside, doing blasting work, or conducting research. The cave was first explored by Brian Price and his team in 1949 and 1950. However, it was not until 1957 that the Hereford Caving Club managed to get past the first boulder choke and discovered the main part of the cave. In 1971, John Parker, Jay Phillips, and others explored further by diving through water-filled passages, making the known cave system longer. In 1973, more exploration was done by Martin Farr and Roger Solari. Martin Farr and Roger Solari were exactly the kind of cavers who loved exploring the longest cave systems. They wanted to find new passages beyond what was already mapped. Even though Martin was 23 and Roger was 26, they were quite experienced. They had been exploring dry caves for almost 10 years, but had only started cave diving in the last 3 years. In 1974, Martin and Roger planned to team up to map more of the Agen Allwedd cave system in South Wales. A well-known explorer named John Parker had recently stopped exploring after he found a third sump, a water-filled passage, in one of the cave's longest passages. Martin and Roger hoped to continue where he left off and discover more of the cave. A sump is a tunnel in a dry cave that goes down and is filled with water. If the sump is very short, cavers might just hold their breath and try to swim through it. However, longer sumps require full scuba diving gear to get through safely. The challenges and dangers of dry caving become much greater when cave diving is involved. Martin and Roger were planning to go beyond the 2 sumps that had already been discovered. They wanted to explore the new third sump that had recently been found. This was a big task because it involved both caving and diving, making it much more complicated and risky. Despite the difficulties, Martin and Roger were eager to push the boundaries of the cave and discover new passages. Their goal was to map more of the cave system and extend what was already known. In May, Martin planned a trip to explore the cave, but he had to go alone because Roger had hurt his knee. Going solo in a cave is always more dangerous because if something goes wrong, there is no one to help or call for assistance. Martin knew about these risks, but he was determined to get through the third sump and see what was on the other side. Just reaching the third sump was a huge challenge. The hike through the cave is like a maze of tunnels, boulder chokes, and tight squeezes, and it takes hours. It's nearly a mile into the cave to reach the 3 sumps. A caver must carry all the diving equipment, including a couple of air tanks per person each. Each tank has to be pushed through the narrow passages and boulder chokes in the main path. A boulder choke is an area where fallen rocks have blocked the tunnel with large rocks that cannot be moved. Smaller pieces of rock are moved away, but the path remains mostly blocked. Martin had to navigate through these difficult and dangerous sections, pushing his equipment along as he went. Despite the dangers, Martin was determined to succeed in his solo mission and explore the unexplored parts of the cave. Martin had to push his equipment through the holes first, and then he had to squeeze and twist his body to get through. This tough journey would exhaust most people, but not Martin Farr. He was full of excitement about what might be beyond the third sump. When he reached the first sump, he had already traveled over 4,000 feet through tough passages. These passages included low stoops, tight crawls, and narrow squeezes in the Southern Stream Passage. Moving through the first 2 sumps would be fairly easy for Martin because they were about 250 feet and 85 feet long. Even though these dives were relatively short, it was still quite a challenge to swim through the tight underwater tunnels. After each dive, he would come up in small, open pools that led to even more unknown paths. The third sump was much longer than the first two, and no one had completely swum through it yet. Martin hoped he would have enough air to reach the end, but he didn't know what he might find beyond it. He swam the entire length of the third sump, which was 850 feet long. This was more than 3 times the length of the first sump. When he finally made it to the next air chamber, he was excited to see what lay ahead. Martin left his diving equipment at the edge of the third sump and continued on foot. The path he followed was full of twists and turns. This long path zigzagged back and forth for 1,800 feet, which is the length of 5 football fields. When Martin came around the next corner, he was amazed to see the pool of another sump. He realized that he would not be able to enter the water on this trip because his air tank, which he had left at the third sump, would only be enough to get him back through the 3 dives he had already completed. Martin knew he had a long journey ahead to get back to the exit. He was a mile away from the entrance and would need to spend the next 4 or 5 hours working his way out of the cave. He had to retrace his steps through the tough passages, tight squeezes, and underwater tunnels to reach the surface safely. Despite the challenge, Martin was thrilled by his discovery and determined to return another day to explore even further. As soon as Martin was back on the surface, he contacted Roger to plan their next visit. They would need to bring an extra air tank each to explore the 4th sump in the cave system. Roger felt the same excitement as Martin at the thought of what might be on the other side. It takes a special kind of caver to see this as an exciting adventure. Their plan was to trek more than a mile into the cave, including dives through 4 narrow tunnels of water to reach an unknown cave or air pocket on the other side. For most people, just thinking about the trapped feeling that would come after dozens of tight squeezes and long dives would be frightening. The idea of getting trapped deeper and deeper into the cave would be too scary for many. Martin and Roger, however, were thrilled by the challenge. They were excited to see what new discoveries they could make. The next trip would be tough, but they were ready to push themselves to explore further. They knew they needed to be well prepared, with extra air tanks and a solid plan, to safely make it through the 4th sump and beyond. Despite the risks, their love for caving and their curiosity about the unknown kept them motivated. On June 15, 1974, Roger and Martin ventured through the path Martin had explored just weeks earlier. Before diving into Sump 3, they switched to fresh air cylinders, leaving their partially used tanks on the bank for the return trip. Carrying 3 tanks each into the dark cave, they prepared to start the dive into Sump 3 with 2 full tanks each. Both Roger and Martin were excited as they come out from Sump 3 onto a new pathway. It was Roger's first time on this route, and they felt the thrill of exploration. During the slow and careful 1,800-foot trek, they moved methodically to avoid damaging their crucial diving gear. When they reached the sump pool and set down their equipment, a sudden wave of heavy dread washed over them. A minute ago, they were happy and excited with electric mood. Now everything turned into silence, even though they really wanted to keep exploring the cave, but something felt not good. They realized they were far from the freedom of the cave entrance, and the air was stuck and hard to breathe. Each of them had a full tank for the dive into Sump 4, plus the remainder of the tank they had used in Sump 3. However, this assurance didn't ease their minds. The thought of a single malfunctioning valve or damaged tube could potentially trap them in that confined space. Despite their training and preparation, the reality of the risks they faced in cave diving became simply clear. They knew they had to proceed with utmost caution and attention to every detail to ensure their safety and the success of their exploration. Despite the heavy, unsettling feeling, both of them gathered their gear and slipped beneath the water's surface. Roger carried a spool with 400 feet of line to be laid out, while Martin had another spool with an additional 1,000 feet of line. They worked together as a team, even though each was diving independently. Each man knew they were responsible for their own safety, including deciding when to turn back. Roger's air tanks were slightly smaller than Martin's, so they decided he would need to turn back before Martin. Moreover, their buoyancy are different. Roger was positively buoyant, which meant he tended to float towards the surface, while Martin was negatively buoyant and sank towards the bottom. Underwater, communication was limited to hand signals and the occasional touch, both of them moving carefully and laying out the guideline as they go deeper into the sump. The darkness and silence around them added to the eerie atmosphere, but their training kept them focused on the task at hand. Each stroke of the fin and adjustment of the line was critical, ensuring they maintained their orientation and could find their way back. As they moved deeper into Sump Four, the visibility became low and the water temperature dropped. They knew they were entering more uncharted territory, where the little mistake could have serious consequences. Yet, their training and experience kept them focused and calm. Each movement was deliberate, each decision carefully made to maximize their chances of success and safety. Roger and Martin's journey through the underwater tunnels was not just about exploration. It was a test of their skills, endurance, and trust in each other. They relied on their equipment, their training, and their deep understanding of the cave's challenges to navigate through the darkness and uncertainty. They moved slowly through the newly discovered sump, carefully twisting their bodies to fit through the narrowest sections. As they laid the line, they found themselves going deeper and deeper into the cave. It was certainly no time to panic. Roger's reel ran out of line at 400 feet. At this point, Martin tied his line to Roger's and noticed that Roger was having sinus issues again. Roger had this problem many times before, but he was not willing to let the pain stop him from making this important discovery. He pushed on and followed as Martin laid the next 100 feet of line. During this part of the dive, Martin knew he was breaking a crucial diving rule called the Rule of Thirds. This rule says that a diver should use 1/3 of their air to go in, 1/3 to come back, and keep 1/3 in reserve for emergencies. Martin had already used his first third of air and should have turned back when Roger's line ran out. Knowing that Roger had less air, Martin assumed Roger had reached his third and was heading back to the surface of Sump Four. But Martin's curiosity got the better of him. In a dangerous move, he decided to push on. In a risky move, Martin continued diving until he came to a gravel wall of rock. This seemed like clear evidence that he might be coming to the end of the sump and that there could be an air pocket above. Martin felt the excitement of discovery, but he also knew he was pushing the limits of safety. The gravel wall gave him hope that they were close to finding something new and unexplored. Martin and Roger were deep into unknown territory. They needed to be careful and aware of their air supply and surroundings. Despite the pain and the challenges, their determination and curiosity kept them moving forward, hoping to uncover the mysteries that lay ahead. Martin planned to swim up the wall a little way and find an air pocket to rest in before going back. The only problem was his air tank. He'd already used way more than half of it, which wasn't good. That meant he'd need almost all his air left to get back to safety. Martin swam up the wall really fast. He checked his meter, only 3 feet from the top. Maybe there was an air bubble there? But no luck. Just a big, solid rock ceiling. There was no air to breathe up there. Martin knew he should probably go back now from this point. But then, he saw the cave go turn to the right. Maybe there was an air pocket to breathe over there, hidden behind the big bumpy rock. With a little hope, he pulled himself along for another 30 feet to see what was behind the rock. No air pocket at all, only solid rock. Just a dead end. Martin felt both disappointed and urgent. He had taken a big risk by going this far, and now he had to get back to the surface of Sump Four with the remaining air in his tank. The situation was dangerous, and he needed to move quickly and carefully to avoid running out of air. He turned around and started the long journey back, knowing that every second mattered. Martin swam back the way he came and saw Roger waiting a bit ahead near the turny part of the cave. Roger was close to the top, and he was shocked. Martin waved him really fast to come back with him right away. Roger's face looked worried, like maybe he knew he didn't have enough air left to swim all the way back up, 500 feet, to where they could breathe again. He had probably been hoping to find the same pocket of air that Martin had expected. Both men were surprised and disappointed to find that the sump did not end with a new cave or an air pocket. Martin knew they had to move fast. He quickly moved down to the bottom of the passage and began following the line out toward the exit. Every second counted, and he had to be careful but quick to avoid running out of air. Martin started swimming back, but after only about 130 feet, his air tank ran out of air. He tried to switch to his backup air, but when he summed quick calculations, he realized it wouldn't be enough. He still had a long way to go, 300 feet through Sump 4 and then another 850 feet through the Sump 3. He knew he had a partial air tank left between the Sump 2 and 3. If only he could make it that far. Martin surfaced in the Sump 4 pool with a deep sense of relief, surrounded by a room full of air. He checked his gauge and saw there was barely enough air left to dive through the next sump. It was a scary realization of how close he had come to a serious emergency. But it wasn't over yet. While Martin waited for Roger to catch up, he climbed out of the water and sat down to rest. He He knew Roger had even less air than him, and if Roger didn't show up soon, things could get really bad. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Martin started to worry. Even if Roger made it out of Sump 4, he might not have enough air left for the Sump 3. Every minute felt longer, and the water was quiet, no bubbles or movement at all. An hour passed. By now, Martin knew Roger wouldn't have any air left. It looked like there weren't any hidden air pockets to save him. Martin took a deep breath and stepped into the water and grabbed the guideline to check its tension. He pulled and pulled until it became clear that the line was no longer connected. He reeled in the line until he reached the end where it had been cleanly cut. The cut was at the 430-foot mark on the line, which meant Roger was on his way back from the 500-foot mark where Martin had last seen him. This was likely where Roger needed to switch tanks. Martin floated to the surface and held onto the guideline to keep his position secure. In 1974, switching tanks during dive was not an easy task. The equipment was poorly designed, and finding the valve to make the swap often required removing tanks and twisting your body to reach it. When a tank was low on air, the diver had to suck the remaining air out, which was a stressful and uneasy effort. In these circumstances, Roger could have easily become tangled in the guideline. He might have been forced to quickly cut the line to free himself and find air. Without the guideline to guide him, in murky and silt-filled passages, he could have easily swum in the wrong direction. It's unclear exactly what caused him to run out of air in that tunnel. It's certain, though, that he would have been stressed and desperately searching for any pocket of air to breathe. Sadly, he did not find it. Martin had to stay calm to safely complete the 3 dives ahead of him for exit and make the long hike back to the surface. It would take hours before he could inform others about Roger's situation and organize a search team to find his body. The heartbreaking truth is that if they had followed the rule of thirds, Roger would still be alive. If Roger had become tangled or went in the wrong direction with half a tank of air left, he might have had a chance to correct himself and safely make it out. If Martin had kept a reserve of air, he would have had enough to turn back and search for Roger when he didn't see him along the passage. But without that reserve, the situation became dire, and the outcome was tragic. After this dive, Martin Farr promised never to break the rule of thirds again. He went on to have a successful diving career over the next few decades. Despite numerous efforts over weeks and years following the accident, Roger could not be located in Sump 4. In 1981, Martin conducted an extensive search of the sump but found no trace of Roger. The area remained incredibly challenging to explore, requiring all equipment and air to be carried over a mile deep into the tunnels. It would be years before another team would venture into this sump, with hopes of completing the exploration that Roger had started. In the fall of 1986, Ian Rowland and Julian Walker dared to go 720 feet deep into the sump and discovered Roger Solari's body 12 years after he went missing. Due to the extreme difficulty of reaching the sump, it was too risky to attempt recovery, so Roger's body was left in place. The following year, in 1987, Ian Walker made another challenging journey through Sump 4 and reached its end after traveling 875 feet through narrow underwater passages. He finally found the sought-after air pocket everyone had hoped for. This cave system's final chamber, discovered against all odds, was appropriately named Against All Odds Chamber. Access to the cave is now restricted, with the entrance locked and accessible only to experienced cavers with permission. A plaque was installed near Sump 1 in honor of Roger Solari's life. In the end, their brave journey through the scary cave tunnels showed both bravery and sadness. Finding Roger's final resting place after all those years answered a big question, but it also reminded everyone of the dangers hidden deep underground. Let's take a moment to think about this amazing story of exploring and losing a friend. A group of young adventurers excited to explore the stunning Cass Cave begins their descent into the deep, dark underground. But what went wrong during their thrilling adventure? As they got tangled in a web of ropes and a loud waterfall, their excitement quickly turns into a dangerous struggle. What happened down there, and how did their exciting exploration turn into fight for survival? Stay tuned to discover the twists and turns of this intense cave adventure. Cass Cave is a fascinating natural wonder located in Cass, West Virginia, on Cheat Mountain. This cave is a hidden world beneath the earth, formed over thousands of years. Caves like Cass Cave are known for their large rooms, beautiful rock formations, and sometimes even waterfalls. One of the most amazing parts of Cass Cave is the Big Room. This huge space is 800 feet long, 180 feet high, and 75 feet wide. Imagine a giant underground hall where you can explore and discover. It's like a hidden treasure chest full of surprises. The big room is so big that it feels like an enormous indoor stadium made of rock. Cass Cave also has something very special: the tallest underground waterfall in both West Virginia and Virginia. This impressive waterfall is called Lacey Suicide Falls, and it drops 139 feet. The name might sound a bit strange, but it comes from an unfortunate event that happened at a smaller waterfall near the cave's entrance, not the main one. Exploring Cass Cave is quite an adventure, and not for those who are afraid of challenges. Just before reaching the top of the big waterfall, there's a tricky climb leading to an upper chamber. In this area, cavers use bolts and ropes to help them navigate the climb and descent safely. A special piece of equipment called a belay is used to ensure safety during the climb and the 160-foot drop into the big room. After this daring drop, cavers find themselves in the big room, which leads to other parts of the cave for more exploration. Although Cass Cave is currently closed to the public due to many rescue operations over the years, it remains a topic of great interest for cave enthusiasts and adventurers. Its beauty and unique features continue to captivate the imagination of those who dream of exploring its depths. In June 1964, National Geographic featured Cass Cave with an amazing 2-page photograph. The photo, taken by Huntley Ingalls, shows a caver climbing a wire ladder next to the waterfall. To capture this stunning image, special bright lights were used to illuminate the scene. This photo helps us understand just how dramatic and beautiful the cave can be. In the world of cave exploration, there are stories that capture the thrill and danger of venturing into the unknown. One such story involves a group of young adventurers who decided to explore Cass Cave, a majestic and challenging cave system. Cass Cave, famous for its breathtaking features, has always attracted those eager for adventure. The cave's beauty is undeniable, but it also comes with its own set of risks. The cave's vast spaces and towering waterfalls make it a thrilling destination for experienced cavers. On 16th of March 1968, a day that started with high spirits and enthusiasm, 6 young explorers, Frank Ahern, Eric Smith, Benny Stone, Bonnie Jo Grieve, Mary Cole, and Pam Riley, aged between 20 and 23, set out to explore Cass Cave. These young adventurers were excited to experience the thrill of caving and the challenge that came with it. They had rigged their gear from a place known as the Belay Loft, preparing for a daunting 180-foot descent into the big room. This large chamber is one of Cass Cave's most famous features and a true test for any caver. By 2:30 p.m., Smith and Ahern had successfully rappelled down the cave, using belays to ensure their safety. Grieve followed next, but she faced a serious problem. Her belay and rappel lines twisted and became tangled, stopping her descent halfway down. She found herself suspended in the air, her belay line tightening around her chest and making it difficult to breathe and move. The situation quickly became dire. Those at the top of the cave couldn't see what was happening to Grieve, and the loud sound of the waterfall in the big room made it impossible for them to hear her cries for help. Those at the bottom were also helpless, as they had no way to assist her from where they were. The waterfall's noise was so loud that it drowned out any attempts at communication. Benny Stone realized how serious the situation was, knew he had to act fast. He lowered a 3rd rope down the cave and started his descent to reach Grieve. When he got to her, he saw that she was exhausted and could barely move. Her situation was critical, and she needed help immediately. Stone realized he couldn't handle this alone. He quickly called for more help from the top of the cave. The ropes were twisted and tangled, making everything more difficult. The conditions were tough, and Stone was getting worn out from the effort. He worked tirelessly, trying to untangle the ropes and assist Grieve. Despite his hard work, the ropes were badly tangled that Stone couldn't free her. After an hour or 2 of struggling, he was exhausted and had to use a climbing technique called prusicking to climb back to the bottom. This technique uses special gear to help climbers ascend a rope, and it was the only way Stone could manage to get himself out of the tricky situation. While all this was happening, Smith was at the top of the cave making an important decision. He decided to climb up and try to fix the tangled belay line that was causing so much trouble for Grieve. For hours, Smith worked hard to untangle the ropes and help Grieve. They put in a lot of effort together, but the ropes were so messed up that they couldn't make any more progress. After 5 grueling hours of hanging on the ropes, the situation was still dire. Finally, they managed to lower Grieve to the bottom using a special rappel technique. This technique used a brake bar from below to control the descent and ensure Grieve was safely brought down. Just then, help arrived from Greenbank. August Sandqvist, Mike Ballister, and John Payne showed up with more equipment and a ladder to assist in the rescue. Mary Cole also came down with comfortable slings for Grieve, making sure she was safe and more comfortable. At the top, Ahern and Stone pitched in with extra help to finish the rescue. After a lot of hard work and teamwork, Grieve was finally pulled out of the cave. The other explorers used the ladder brought by the rescuers to make their way out safely. It was a long, intense rescue, but thanks to the bravery and quick thinking of everyone involved, the team was able to get out of the cave safely. This incident shows how risky cave exploration can be, especially if you're not ready for it. The young explorers, even though they were excited and eager, didn't have enough experience for a cave as challenging as Cass Cave. Caves, like Cass Cave, are deep and complicated, and they need careful planning and lots of experience to explore safely. Inexperienced cavers should start with easier, less risky caves. This helps them build the skills and confidence they need before taking on more dangerous adventures. Trying to explore tough caves without enough preparation can be very dangerous. Cass Cave, with its amazing features and tricky terrain, reminds us of both the beauty and the danger of exploring the underground world. For anyone dreaming of adventure, it's crucial to be well prepared and to fully understand the risks. The story of these young explorers teaches us an important lesson about the need for safety and careful preparation in the exciting world of caving. Exploring caves can be thrilling and beautiful, but it's also full of challenges and risks. It's easy to get caught up in the excitement and forget about the dangers. That's why proper training and planning are so important. This rescue story is a powerful reminder that adventure should always be approached with respect for the dangers and with the right skills and equipment. Deep beneath a giant floating iceberg, a team of daring divers explores a hidden world of ice and mystery. But their adventure takes a dangerous turn when a powerful current traps them in a maze of water. Will they find their way out before the icy grip of the iceberg claims them forever? Let's explore the Antarctic Iceberg Cave incident. Jill Heinerth, born in 1965, is a Canadian cave diver, underwater explorer, writer, and filmmaker. She has worked on TV series for PBS, National Geographic, and the BBC, and helped on movies with directors like James Cameron. She has written books and made documentaries, including We Are Water and Ben's Vortex. Growing up in the 1960s, Jill watched the exciting Apollo missions that put humans on the moon. This made her dream of becoming an astronaut, but her mom had to tell her that Canada didn't have a space program back then. Luckily, Jill had other inspirations. She eagerly waited every week for something else that excited her. As a child, Jill was inspired by Jacques Cousteau. She studied visual communications design at York University and later moved to the Cayman Islands in 1991 to dive full-time. She then moved to Florida to focus on cave diving, learning from filmmaker Wes Skiles. In 1998, Jill helped make the first 3D map of an underwater cave. She was the first person to dive the ice caves of Antarctica and explored ice caves and icebergs, documented in the film Ice Island. Jill has explored caves around the world, including Christmas Island in 2015 and the Bell Island Mines in Canada in 2016. She is a Fellow of the Explorers Club and the first explorer in residence of the Royal Canadian Geographical Society. In 2022, she led a team that found a sunken World War II bomber in Newfoundland. She was also part of a team that found the wreck of the Quest, a ship from the Shackleton-Rowett expedition. Jill is featured in the documentary Diving into the Darkness, which won an award in 2024. She lives in Carleton Place, Ontario, with her husband Robert McClellan. She enjoys hiking, kayaking, and cycling. In Florida, Jill started working with filmmaker Wes Skiles. Wes became her mentor and gave her the chance to write and produce several independent films. During this time, they also worked together with National Geographic. In the late 90s, Jill and Wes started talking about wanting to go to Antarctica. They knew National Geographic was interested in doing a story there too, but they needed to find a good topic for the story. One day, while they were brainstorming ideas, something amazing happened. A big chunk of ice broke away from the Ross Ice Shelf. This gave the perfect topic for their story in Antarctica. This wasn't any chunk of ice. Iceberg B-15 was the largest iceberg ever recorded by area. An ice shelf is a large, floating glacier that stretches out from the coast. Like most glaciers, it slowly moves downwards because of its own weight. In places like Antarctica, these glaciers form on the coast and flow into the water. When the ice sheets become very large, the connection point can crack and break off, creating an iceberg. These ice shelves are incredibly huge and their size is truly impressive. Iceberg B-15 measured about 295 by 37 kilometers, with a surface area of 11,000 square kilometers, which is about the same size of Jamaica or 10 times the size of New York City. When it broke off, it became the largest moving object on Earth. Amazingly, this wasn't a complete surprise. It broke off from the Ross Ice Shelf in Antarctica in March 2000. After breaking away, Iceberg B-15 split into smaller pieces. The largest piece was called Iceberg B-15A. In 2003, B-15A drifted away from Ross Island into the Ross Sea and started heading north. In October 2005, it broke into several smaller icebergs. In 2018, a large piece of the original iceberg was still moving north, located between the Falkland Islands and South Georgia Island. As of August 2023, the U.S. National Ice Center was still tracking a piece of B-15 that was large enough to be monitored. This piece, called B-15AB, measures 20 kilometer by 7 kilometer and is currently grounded off the coast of Antarctica in the Ameri region. Scientists had been watching the cracks in the ice shelf and thought it was only a matter of time before it broke off. When it did, Jill guessed that, like soft limestone, flowing water would carve out crevasses, tunnels, and caves in the ice. Even though she wasn't sure this was true, she and Wes told National Geographic about the idea. National Geographic loved it and gave them the money they needed for an expedition. In 2001, Jill and her team left New Zealand and sailed for 12 days through rough 60-foot waves to reach the part of the iceberg they wanted to explore. When they arrived, Jill was amazed. The iceberg looked like a mountain floating in the ocean, with some parts having thousands of feet of pure ice cliffs rising from the water. They chose a good spot and got into a smaller Zodiac boat to move around more easily. They left the main ship and headed towards a small bay that would lead them into the frozen ocean. As they got closer, Jill felt nervous. She wasn't as worried about herself, but more about Wes and her husband, Paul, who were coming with her. Even though they were all experienced divers, she still felt concerned for their safety. Her longtime dive partner, Wes Skiles, started a film company called Karst Productions in 1985 to grow his career in underwater films. Wes always believed that cave divers should use their skills to help with scientific diving projects. During his career, he worked on more than 100 films. He filmed, directed, and produced these films, and was a true expert underwater. Her husband, Paul, was also very skilled in diving. He was a leader in diver education and held important positions in several prestigious diving associations. Paul was a master instructor and set records for diving depth in caves at various times. Both Wes and Paul were highly experienced and respected in the diving community. However, despite their impressive backgrounds, both Wes and Paul had never done ice diving like Jill. This would be the coldest dive they had ever attempted. Their lack of experience became a problem right from the start. As soon as they rolled off the boat into the water, Wes's suit filled with water. Despite this, he tried to tough it out for a minute to test their new camera. But in water just above freezing, your body loses control and clarity almost instantly. After filming for that minute, Wes was essentially sitting in a bag of ice water. It took Jill, Paul, and several others to pull Wes back onto the boat. They rushed him back to the main ship and wrapped him in a warm sleeping bag immediately to heat him up. And this was just the first minute of their first dive. Moreover, to their extensive experience in limestone caves, Jill, Paul, and Wes faced a new challenge with the ice cave they planned to explore. It was unmapped territory. Unlike tying lines to solid rock, they had to use titanium ice screws anchored into the ice for safety. After their initial test dive, Jill and Paul decided to return to the water to verify Jill's earlier predictions. They entered the cold water once more, feeling a mix of nervousness and excitement. Immediately, they felt a sensation almost like brain freeze due to the icy water. Despite wearing wetsuits that covered them from head to toe, they chose slightly less restrictive face masks to improve visibility. From the surface, they descended through slush, ice chunks, and a mix of salt water and fresh water. Eventually, they found a large crack in the iceberg and followed it downward as daylight slowly faded behind them. As they explored deeper into the crevasse, they descended to the ocean floor, reaching a depth of 130 feet. After looking around for a bit, they were amazed to find exactly what Jill had predicted: a passage leading into a cave directly under the massive iceberg. Slowly swimming into the icy cavern, they were stunned to discover a vibrant ecosystem thriving on the sea floor. Above them, the iceberg's towering blue and white ice loomed, while the ocean floor was adorned with red, yellow, and orange filter-feeding organisms that Jill likened to a shag carpet. As they ventured deeper into the cave, suddenly, a multitude of spider-lobster-like isopods started falling from the cracks above. These creatures, each about the size of a hand palm, landed all over Jill, Paul, and their camera equipment, creating a surreal and unexpected encounter. After shaking off the isopods, Jill and Paul ventured deeper into the dark blue cave. The ice around them and above them constantly made groaning, clicking, and popping sounds against the sea floor. They were now keenly aware that unlike limestone caves, the ice here was not only moving, but changing rapidly. Suddenly, a deep, groaning vibration passed through Jill's entire body. She looked at Paul, who clearly felt it too. Although unsettling, they looked around and everything seemed fine, so they decided to continue exploring. As they went deeper, the icy surroundings felt strange and fascinating. The moving ice made the atmosphere surreal, with echoes and sounds that added to their sense of wonder and caution. Despite the cave's unpredictability, Jill and Paul kept going because they were curious and wanted to explore more of this special underwater world. It wasn't until later, on their way back, that they realized things were wrong. Huge chunks of ice had blocked the cave's exit passage. The doorway they had entered through was gone. The noise they heard earlier was the ice breaking and blocking their way out. With no other choices, they cautiously moved towards the ice chunks. Luckily, they managed to squeeze past them and return to the crevasse. At around 20 feet deep, Jill and Paul had to pause to decompress. Jill noticed Wes and another crew member high-fiving and cheering. Later, they found out that these two had witnessed a massive chunk of iceberg breaking off and blocking their exit path. The resulting wave was so large that it nearly flipped their boat. They had no way to rescue Jill and Paul, or even know if they could escape. The crew had no idea if Jill and Paul could find another way out, or if they were safe. They nervously waited, hoping to spot them in the water again. The next day, Jill, always the professional, remained hopeful about returning to the water. Despite the challenges, she felt they had learned from their previous experience, which improved their chances. It was still risky in this unknown territory, but at least it wasn't their first time diving here. Once in the water again with Paul, they quickly reached the cave entrance. The opening seemed stable, so they ventured in to photograph the cave and its sea life. During this second dive, Jill noticed a gentle current flowing through the cave that hadn't been there before. Gradually, the current grew stronger until suddenly it began rushing through the cave very fast. Jill instinctively dug her hand into the seafloor to anchor herself and prevent being swept away. The strong current spun her body around her hand. Later, they realized that the iceberg had melted during the day, sending meltwater through the cave, creating the current. Seeing how powerful it was, they knew they had to leave immediately to avoid being pulled deeper into the iceberg. But as they turned toward the exit and started swimming, the current was so strong that they couldn't make any headway. They kicked hard, but it seemed they weren't moving at all. Despite their efforts, they were stuck, and the situation was becoming increasingly dangerous. Looking around rapidly, Jill and Paul spotted a faint blue light in the distance, considering there might be another way out. Looking at each other, they decided to go for it and let the current carry them. They drifted for what felt like a long time, but the light didn't seem to get any closer due to its distance. After what seemed like forever, they finally reached the light and were happy to see it was another way out. As they came up to the surface, Jill looked around and saw they were surrounded by a high chunk of ice. They had drifted deep under the iceberg, and the ice blocked their view of the boat. The visibility was so bad that they couldn't see the boat, and the boat couldn't see them. Her heart sank as she realized they were lost among the ice. Fearing they might freeze if not rescued soon, uncertain of the time that passed, she sat, trembling, hoping for any sign of help. Then, she heard a noise. The same strong current that carried them through the cave had also dislodged the ship's anchor. When the crew pulled it up to reposition, it made a loud noise and caused the boat to shift slightly. In that moment, Jill caught a glimpse of the boat's hull and called out to them. She felt relief when Wes answered her call, and shortly after, they were rescued. After their close call, the team decided to make one last dive. Wes was impressed by the footage and wanted to join them, using his best camera. Since they were already there, they wanted to make the most of their trip. So, all three of them prepared and descended into the ocean once more. This time, Jill noticed a small leak in her glove, letting icy water seep in. She debated whether it was bad enough to surface, but decided to continue. Soon, they reached the ocean floor and began taking photos inside the cave. However, the current intensified quickly, stronger than before. Jill signaled to Wes and Paul that it was time to leave. As they headed for the exit, the current was so strong they struggled to make progress. They used their hands to crawl along the ground, but it wasn't enough to move against the current. They pulled and strained until their arms ached and trembled. Jill started to worry they might not make it out. Leading the way, Jill was in front, Paul behind her, and Wes at the end, struggling. Wes called for help with the camera, but Jill was more concerned with survival than filming. When Paul fell back to assist, Jill was angry. It was a dangerous mistake that jeopardized everyone. The situation was tense as they fought against the powerful current, each moment feeling like a battle for survival. They continued to push forward, hoping desperately to reach safety before it was too late. Luckily, with their combined effort, they managed to exit the cave and reach the crevasse. However, even after getting into the crevasse, the powerful current caused by the rushing meltwater pushed them down to the ocean floor, trapping them 130 feet deep underwater. Jill scanned the smooth walls of the crevasse, desperately searching for something to hold on to. After being in the water for over 2 hours, Jill's hand was almost completely frozen from the leak, and she struggled to find something to hold on to as she slipped off the slick ice wall. Then, she remembered seeing tiny fish that dug holes into the ice, about the size of a thumb. Running her hand along the ice, she found these burrows and jammed her fingers inside for a grip. Together, all three of them slowly climbed up 130 feet of ice, inching their way out of the crevasse and back to the surface. Nearly 3 hours later, they emerged from the ice, and Jill's hand looked gray and lifeless. When she tried to grab the ladder, her hand couldn't even close around the handle. Despite this, they successfully made it out, and Jill's hand eventually recovered without any lasting issues. Amazingly, just 2 hours later, the team had their equipment ready once again, eager to make one final dive. They couldn't pass up the chance to capture more footage while they still had the opportunity. They knew they might be the last people ever to experience this unique underwater environment. While they were eating and discussing their next dive, they suddenly heard shouts from the lookout on deck. All three hurried up to see what was happening and were shocked to witness the iceberg they had recently explored breaking apart. It rolled and churned violently, causing chunks of ice to crash into the ocean, creating huge waves that threatened the boat. Seeing this, they all realized that if they had still been underwater, they might not have survived. In that moment, they understood that they were likely the only ones to ever explore beneath that iceberg. It was a surreal realization that they had experienced something truly unique and possibly once in a lifetime. They were fortunate to capture extensive footage inside the cave, which later became the documentary Ice Island. Although it's been a few years since its release, it's unfortunately not available online. Despite facing challenges as a woman in the diving world, Jill is now widely recognized as one of the best divers globally, regardless of gender. In 2018, she received the Beneath the Sea Diver of the Year Education Award. Then, in 2020, she was honored with induction into the International Scuba Diving Hall of Fame. Jill has also earned numerous other awards for her diving achievements, filmmaking, and writing. She remains active in all these fields. Throughout her career, Jill considers her exploration of the B-15 iceberg as a standout moment. It's a testament to her dedication and skill in underwater exploration and storytelling. In the end, Jill, Paul, and Wes made it safely back from the icy depths, their hearts pounding with relief. As they surfaced, they saw the massive iceberg crumbling into the sea, a powerful reminder of nature's strength. Despite the challenges, they become successful to capture incredible footage. That's the thrilling tale of the Antarctic iceberg cave incident. It was a close call, but these brave explorers have a story to tell. Deep within the mysterious passages of Breathing Cave, a group of adventurous young cavers set out to explore its hidden wonders. Their goal was simple: to navigate the challenging passages and reach the breathtaking waterfall deep within the cave. But as they ventured further, something went wrong. What happened in those dark, twisting tunnels? Were they prepared for the challenges that lay ahead? Let's uncover the chilling events that unfolded deep underground, where every decision could mean the difference between life and death. We are exploring one of Virginia's most popular wild caves, Breathing Cave, located in Bath County. This cave is a favorite among cavers due to its extensive passages, complex layout, and numerous vertical obstacles. Stretching over 4.5 miles, Breathing Cave has challenged cavers for decades. Breathing Cave is a rare type of cave known as a barometric cave. In these caves, air flows in and out due to differences in atmospheric pressure between the inside and outside. While most caves experience airflow because of temperature differences, barometric caves like Breathing Cave have air moving because of pressure changes. When the air pressure outside the cave is higher, air blows into the cave, and when the pressure inside is higher, air blows out. If the pressures are equal, there is no airflow. Breathing Cave is part of a larger cave system that includes Butler Cave. Together, they feature remarkable natural wonders such as a 40-foot waterfall, a natural bridge, unique floating crystalline formations, and an underground lake. These stunning features make the cave system a must-see for any cave enthusiast. When planning your visit to Breathing Cave, it's essential to use the designated parking area and trail, which were changed by the cave owner a few years ago. The parking area is located on Route 609, about 200 yards northeast of the Bath-Highland County line. If you are coming from the northeast, the trailhead is 3.4 miles southwest on Burnsville Road, Route 609, when heading towards Burnsville, Virginia, from the Route 678 intersection. If you are coming from the southwest, the trailhead is 2.7 miles northeast from Burnsville, Virginia, on Route 609. On the bright afternoon of May 28th, a group of 6 excited cavers gathered at the entrance of Breathing Cave, located in Bath County, Virginia. Among them were Phil Gettle, 25, Lee Gettle, 23, Jim Young, 17, Joe Chiara, 15, Dale Iberson, 20, and Jay Herbing, 33. Their goal was a daring adventure through the cave's new section to the mesmerizing waterfall that many had spoken of. With all but 2 of the team members having explored Breathing Cave before, they felt confident and excited about the journey ahead. Breathing Cave is a popular spot among cavers due to its challenging passages and unique features. As a barometric cave, air flows in and out due to atmospheric pressure changes. This fascinating natural phenomenon adds an extra layer of intrigue for those exploring its depths. At about 12:30 p.m., the group entered the cave, eager to explore its wonders. They proceeded at a leisurely pace, stopping to investigate side passages and marvel at the cave's natural beauty. They reached the cathedral passage just before 2 p.m., a 300-foot-long canyon with a high ceiling. The passage offered 2 routes, a lower path involving crawling through wet passages and an upper route requiring more technical skills, such as canyon hopping and chimneying. The group chose the upper route, seeking the thrill of the challenge. As they crossed the canyon past the Splattermite climb, 4 members had successfully made it to the other side when it was 15-year-old Joe Chiara's turn. Straddling the canyon, he used ledges on both sides as footholds. Suddenly, Chiara lost his footing and fell 50 feet to the lower level. The only sound he made was a brief, which was enough for Iberson to see him plummeting down. The fall was sudden and unexpected, leaving the group in shock. Immediately, Young and the Gettle brothers descended to reach Chiara to know about his condition. It was clear he was badly injured. In a race against time, Herbane hurried back to the surface to get help, instructing another group of cavers to contact the Potomac Speleological Club Fieldhouse and the Cave Rescue Communications Network. Herbine then returned with essential supplies, including a rope, blanket, and plastic sheet, hoping to provide some comfort and aid to Chiara. As time passed, Chiara's condition got worse. His breathing became weaker until, at 4:15 p.m., it stopped completely. Even though they tried to revive him with artificial respiration, there was no response. Lee Gettle and Iberson had already left the cave earlier, but the others stayed behind, hoping for a miracle. Sadly, Chiara's injuries were too serious, and he passed away in the cave, surrounded by his friends. Rescue teams began arriving shortly after 5 p.m., and the difficult task of recovering Chiara's body started at 7:30 p.m. The operation was completed by 11:45 p.m., and the Bath County coroner later confirmed that Chiara had died from a concussion, possibly a broken neck and internal injuries. He also suffered cuts, a fractured wrist, and a dislocated leg. Chiara had been wearing an MSA Comfo cap, a type of hard hat that provided no real protection during the fall. The cap remained on his head because of the chin strap, but it functioned mainly as a lamp carrier rather than a safety helmet. This tragic incident raised important questions about caving safety and the responsibilities of experienced cavers towards beginners. Many people wondered if the group had thought Chiara was more capable than he was, and if they should have taken more precautions to guide and protect those with less experience. It's important for experienced cavers to be careful, supportive, and helpful, especially when their companions are new to difficult environments. Furthermore, this accident highlighted the need to reassess the perceived difficulty of caves like Breathing Cave. Although it is considered relatively easy, the complexity and potential hazards it presents should not be underestimated. The journey took only 20 minutes for the group to reach the point of the accident, but it took over 4 hours to carry Chiara's body out. Handling a live rescue under such conditions would have been incredibly challenging, possibly requiring the setup of a makeshift hospital inside the cave. The thirst for exploration among young cavers is natural and inspiring, driven by a desire to discover the hidden wonders beneath the Earth's surface. However, this enthusiasm must be tempered with caution, awareness, and respect for the dangers that lie within these mysterious environments. This story highlights the need for proper preparation, communication, and vigilance. Experienced cavers should take extra care to guide and protect those with less experience. While the hunger of discovery drives us, we must remember to respect the power of nature and the challenges it presents. While the cave's beauty and mystery continue to draw explorers, the memory of Joe Chiara's unfortunate accident underscores the importance of safety and responsibility in the pursuit of adventure. The mystery of one of the world's most popular YouTubers, MrBeast's New Zealand trip, has been revealed, a place where the only light comes from thousands of glowing worms, turning the underground world into a living, breathing, starry night. What began as a thrilling adventure for a group of YouTubers soon became a battle against the unknown. They had one mission: to survive 7 days in this otherworldly labyrinth. What secrets did the cave hold? The Waitomo glowworm caves are a famous natural attraction located in the northern King Country region of New Zealand's North Island. These caves are about 12 kilometers northwest of Te Kuiti and can be reached by car in just 2 hours from Auckland or 1 hour from Hamilton. The journey to the caves takes you along Waitomo Caves Road, a scenic route that guides you through lush landscapes until you arrive at this magical destination. The caves are renowned for their enchanting population of glowworms, specifically the species Arachnocampa luminosa, which is found only in New Zealand. These glowworms create a mesmerizing display, lighting up the dark caverns like a starry night sky. The Waitomo glowworm caves are part of a larger cave system that includes other fascinating caves like Ruakuri Cave, Lucky Strike, and Tumutumu Cave. Visitors to the Waitomo glowworm caves embark on a guided tour that takes them through 3 different levels of the cave. The tour begins at the top level, known as the catacombs, and moves down through a vertical limestone shaft called the Tomo, which is 16 meters deep. The next stop is the banquet chamber, a historic spot where early explorers would pause to eat. The ceiling here still shows the marks left by their campfires. On less crowded days, visitors might also get a chance to see the largest rock formation in the cave, known as the pipe organ. The tour then continues to the 3rd and final level, where you'll find the cathedral, a stunning chamber with high, rough walls that give it incredible acoustics. Many famous singers, including Dame Kirite Kanawa, have performed here. After exploring the cathedral, the tour concludes with a peaceful boat ride through the glowworm grotto. As you glide along the underground Waitomo River, the only light comes from the glowworms, creating a truly magical experience. Besides the glowworms, the caves are home to various other creatures, including albino cave ants, giant crickets, and New Zealand longfin eels, which inhabit the underground lakes formed by freshwater streams. The cave walls are also adorned with unique fungi, including the cave flower, a mushroom-like fungus related to the genus Pleurotus. The formation of the limestone caves in the Waitomo region began around 30 million years ago when the area was still beneath the ocean. Over time, layers of fossilized marine life, such as corals and seashells, were compressed to form thick limestone deposits, some of which reach depths of over 200 meters. Within these caves, you'll find stunning stalactites and stalagmites, which have taken millions of years to form as water drips from the ceiling or flows down the walls, leaving behind tiny deposits of limestone. When these formations eventually meet, they create impressive pillars or columns, and if they twist around each other, they are known as helictites. The Waitomo glowworm caves are a breathtaking natural wonder, offering a glimpse into a world that has taken millions of years to form and is still evolving today. Our story begins with a group of passionate content creators from the YouTube channel MrBeast. Each member of the team was experienced in caving, but this journey was unlike anything they had done before. Their mission was simple yet ambitious: to explore and document glowworm caverns that create a mesmerizing display, lighting up the dark caverns like a starry night sky that few had dared to enter. The cave, known for its complex network of passages and breathtaking underground landscapes, had always intrigued them. The team consisted of a leader and most experienced caver, the navigator and map expert, the survival guide, Joel, responsible for the team's well-being. Together, they formed a tight-knit group. each member bringing their own unique skills to the adventure. Before embarking on their journey, the team spent weeks preparing for the challenges ahead. They gathered all the necessary gear, including helmets with powerful headlamps, ropes, harnesses, climbing equipment, food, and water supplies. They also packed cameras, batteries, and other recording equipment to document their journey for their YouTube channel, Mr. Beast. Preparation wasn't just about packing the right gear. The team spent countless hours studying maps of the cave, discussing potential risks, and planning their route. They knew that once they entered the cave, they would be cut off from the outside world, relying only on their skills and each other to make it through. The day finally arrived. The team stood at the entrance of the cave, a massive dark hole in the side of a mountain. The air was cool and damp, and the sound of dripping water echoed from deep within the cave. They knew this was the last moment they would see daylight for the next 7 days. With a final check of their equipment, the team switched on their headlamps and stepped into the darkness. The cave's entrance was wide and spacious, but as they ventured deeper, the passageway narrowed. The team had to crawl on their hands and knees at times, squeezing through tight gaps and navigating jagged rocks. On the first day, the team focused on making as much progress as possible while conserving their energy. The descent into the cave was gradual but relentless. The air grew cooler as they moved deeper, and the sound of the outside world faded away, replaced by the eerie silence of the underground. The team encountered their first major challenge late in the day, a vertical drop of about 30 feet. It was too dangerous to climb down without assistance, so they set up a rope system. Team leader went first, securing the rope and guiding the others down. It was a slow and careful process, but they all made it safely to the bottom. By the end of the first day, they had covered a significant distance. They found a relatively flat area to set up camp for the night. The cave was pitch black, and the only light came from their headlamps. They cooked a simple meal, checked their gear, and discussed the day's events. Exhausted but excited, they finally settled down for the night, knowing that the real adventure was just beginning. The second day began early. After a quick breakfast, the team packed up their gear and continued their journey. They were now deep within the cave, far beyond the reach of natural light. The passages grew more complex, with multiple forks and dead ends. The navigator carefully studied the map, trying to keep them on the right path. As they moved further, they came across stunning underground formations, massive stalactites hanging from the ceiling like chandeliers, and stalagmites rising from the ground like ancient pillars. The beauty of the cave was breathtaking, but it was also a reminder of the dangers that lay ahead. One wrong step could lead to injury or worse. Midway through the day, they encountered another obstacle, a narrow underwater passage. The only way forward was to dive through a tunnel that was just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. It was a risky move, but the team was prepared. They suited up in their wetsuits and secured their gear in waterproof bags. Mac and Carl went first, testing the passage before signaling for the others to follow. The underwater tunnel was short but intense. The cold water and the tight space made it a nerve-wracking experience, but they all made it through safely. On the other side, they found themselves in a large cavern with a small stream running through it. It was the perfect spot to take a break, dry off, and give some rest to their bodies for the next day's adventure. They lit a fire to keep themselves warm in this freezing cold cave. By the third day, the team was deep in the heart of the cave. The environment became more challenging with narrow passages, sharp rocks, and treacherous drops. Every step required caution, and every decision was critical. Despite the difficulties, the team was in high spirits, fueled by the excitement of exploration. The highlight of the day came when they discovered a massive underground chamber, larger than any they had seen before. The chamber was filled with towering rock formations, some reaching up to the ceiling far above. The walls were covered in intricate patterns created by centuries of water flow. It was a sight to behold, and the team spent hours exploring every corner, taking photos and videos for their YouTube channel. But the chamber wasn't just a place of beauty. It was also a place of mystery. In one corner, they found a narrow passage leading further into the darkness. The passage was barely wide enough for a person to crawl through, and it seemed to descend even deeper into the earth. The team debated whether to explore it, knowing that it could lead to new discoveries, or more dangers. One moment, they're barely fitting through cracks in the rock. "Oh my God, this is so tight," someone exclaims. The next moment, they find themselves in a massive chamber so enormous that they need to adjust their gear to take it all in. The team uses powerful lights to illuminate the cave's grandeur. However, their excitement quickly turns to surprise as the intense brightness becomes almost blinding. Joel continues to lead the way, guiding the team through tricky climbs and obstacles. "Feel free, there's a really good handle up top there," he advises. "And then you can sort of swing a foot around onto this one." The team navigates with care, following Joel's expert guidance. "Joel, the best caving guide ever, no one's died yet," someone jokes. As they move forward, they reach a point where wetsuits become essential. "From this point on, wetsuits," Joel said. "We're going for a swim." Yesterday, Mac and Carl had joked about this part of the cave, but now it's a reality. The cave's river is freezing cold, making the wetsuits crucial to avoid hypothermia. Inside, the freezing water makes gripping the rocks difficult. The team pushes through, despite the challenges. Even though this part of the cave is tough, the team knows the hardest obstacles are yet to come. "We did it," they cheered. "Hey boys, we're now 10% done," Joel said. With the team's bodies wet and the temperature dropping, it's crucial to keep moving. They set up a small camp to rest and avoid getting even wetter. The cave continues to challenge them with every step. Why is this so difficult? One caver wonders. The team encounters more obstacles, including a spider web that freaks everyone out. "Is that a spider web? Spider? I don't see the spider. That means it's probably on us. It's on you." Someone panics. After hours of intense exploration, Joel has some unfortunate news. "The water is too high and we've taken too long. We're going to have to turn around for today and head back to camp," he says. The team is disappointed but understands the importance of safety. They begin their trek back to camp, realizing they've spent too much time filming and having fun with flares. They decide to restart the mission another day. The team plans their next steps, aiming to rest on day 4 and attempt the full exploration on day 5. The next morning in the cave, the team had only one thing on their minds: a hot shower. "A hot shower would literally save my life right now," one of them says. "Showering would be awesome." As you can imagine, showering inside a cave isn't exactly easy. To get clean, they had to hike all the way back to the riverbed where they first rappelled down. "Oh no! Oh my god, I feel my brain. I've never felt my brain like this. My forehead is frostbite," someone exclaims, feeling the effects of the cold. They come up with a creative solution to warm up. "Let's use the drone to dry our heads off." They turn on the drone, and with a little help from the flying gadget, they dry off. After drying off, the team sits down with Joel to plan their next move. "What is this, Joel?" a team member asks, pointing to a map. "This is the map of the cave," Joel said. "Last time we had to stop because of the fast-moving water, but the rains have been slowing, so we might just get a window to reach the end by tomorrow. This is going to be wild. First, we'll need to pass some of those same rapids from yesterday," Joel continues. "We'll need to dive off massive cliffs and avoid jagged rocks, and if we can make it past all that, we will finally reach the beautiful glowworm chamber." The team is excited, but wants to keep some mystery. "Don't tell us what that looks like. I want us to be surprised," one of them says. "Do you think we're going to make it?" another asks. "No, let's not play that game. We're all going to make it," Joel reassures them. With the plan set, the team takes time to rest and refuel. They make feastable s'mores to regain their energy. The team is excited for the next day. "Tomorrow we're going to explore the entire cave. We'll see you guys then." They try to sleep as much as they can, preparing for the journey to the end of the cave. After the challenges from day 3, we learn to focus less on filming and more on making progress. This strategy will help us to move much faster, but the water was so cold. The area gets narrower and the current is strong. "Where do we go?" Jimmy asks. Joel said, "We're going to use the walls and climb our way along, so here we go. Jump to that first rock," Joel instructs. "There's a couple of good rocks around the corner as well you can get a hand onto." As they move forward, they realize, "It's so dark down here. There's no bottom right now. My feet aren't touching the ground. I can't even see where I'm going, Joel. The current is taking me away. How do I do this?" one of them asks. Joel said, "You've got to get yourself in there and it's going to get way gentler." "I go in here?" They're much deeper in the cave now and moving towards their first serious obstacle. Joel explains, "Basically, the water's recirculating, so if you fall in, it takes you to the bottom and keeps you there. If we fall, we would die," one of them says. "The caves have become so challenging that we're beginning to question if we can even reach the finish line. This is exhausting." This cave is about to get a lot harder. Despite the scare, the team pressed on. They knew they couldn't turn back now. They were too far into the cave. The experience brought them closer together, reinforcing the importance of teamwork and trust. By the end of the day, they had made it through the dangerous passage and found a safe place to camp. They were exhausted, both physically and mentally, but they were also determined. They had come too far to give up now. With only 2 days left, they were more resolved than ever to complete their journey. And after more brutal trekking throughout the cave, we finally arrived at the glowworm chamber. All right, team? Welcome to the glowworm chamber, Joel told them. The team looks around in awe. All of the lights you see here are actually created by tiny bioluminescent glowworms. That kind of looks like the Milky Way galaxy. At this moment, the breathtaking view made that long trek feel worth it. But the journey wasn't over yet. We still had to go all the way back to base camp. It's almost day 6. They're not back, and I'm exhausted, Sean says, worried and tired. I don't know if I'll be able to sleep, though. I'm just worried about them being gone for so long. The trip back was way easier because we were floating with the current. Now, because you guys have already seen the trip, we're going to speed up the way back. But honestly, this whole journey took so long that we crossed into day 6 before reaching camp. The final day of the journey was bittersweet. The team was exhausted, but excited to return to the surface. But they were also reluctant to leave the cave behind. They had spent 7 days in this underground world, facing challenges, discovering wonders, and growing closer as a team. The journey back to the cave's entrance was long and challenging. They retraced their steps, navigating the same obstacles they had faced on the way in. But this time, they were more experienced, more confident in their abilities. They moved quickly, knowing that the end was in sight. As they neared the entrance, they began to see the first signs of daylight. The darkness of the cave gave way to a faint, distant light, growing brighter with each step. It was a welcome sight, a reminder that they were almost home. When they finally emerged from the cave, the sunlight was blinding. They had been underground for so long that their eyes had to adjust to the brightness. The cool, fresh air was a stark contrast to the damp, musty atmosphere of the cave. It was a moment of pure relief and triumph. The team took a moment to reflect on their journey. They had faced numerous challenges, from physical obstacles to the mental strain of being isolated in the cave for 7 days. But they had also experienced moments of incredible beauty and wonder, moments that made all the struggles worthwhile. The team's 7-day journey through the cave was an adventure they would never forget. It tested their endurance, their teamwork, and their resolve. But it also rewarded them with unforgettable experiences, from the discovery of ancient markings to the breathtaking beauty of the glowworm chamber. As they packed up their gear and prepared to leave, they knew that this journey would be a defining moment in their lives. It was a story they would share with their followers on Mr. Beast, inspiring others to explore the world around them and to push their limits.
When you think of mountain climbing accidents such as a deadly avalanche, Ecuador is probably not the first country you think of. However, the South American nation is arguably underreported when it comes to mountaineering disasters. In fact, quite recently, Ecuador witnessed one of the worst climbing disasters the world has seen in years. A monster avalanche claimed the lives of half a dozen people and seriously injured others. It took place on the highest peak in the entire country. It also ignited a firestorm of controversy and even forced some policy changes. This is the story of the Chimborazo avalanche. The date was October 23, 2021. The disaster involved 16 people, all of whom were climbing in groups in central Ecuador. Ecuador has a ton of tall mountains in it. That's because the Andes run right through the middle of the country. Amid a sea of towering snow-capped peaks, the tallest peak in all of Ecuador is that of Chimborazo. Chimborazo is an inactive stratovolcano that stands a whopping 20,541 feet above sea level. Believe it or not, there is a case to be made that it is in fact Chimborazo and not Mount Everest, which is the highest mountain peak on Earth. This is because of the Earth's equatorial bulge. Chimborazo may be closer to sea level than Mount Everest and other Himalayan mountains, but sitting on the equator, it is significantly further away from the center of the Earth, because the Earth itself is not perfectly round. The summit of Chimborazo is as far away from the Earth's center as you can possibly get on land. This adds to the mystique and intrigue of an already popular destination for mountaineering enthusiasts. It was this mystique that led the 16 to attempt to reach the summit on that fateful October day. Another, probably bad thing that appeals to climbers is how easy it is to access. Chimborazo has a parking lot located at 17,000 feet elevation. That's crazy high. There are no people anywhere who live that high up, not even Sherpas in the Himalayas. Imagine being able to drive your car and park in a designated parking lot where you'll die of oxygen deprivation if you stay for too long. But, provided your car hasn't broken down and you haven't succumbed to symptoms of acute hypoxia yet, you still face an impressive 3,500-foot climb up steep slopes of rock and ice before you can officially claim ultimate distance from the center of the Earth. Without the help of bottled oxygen, even lying down and sleeping gets pretty exhausting when you're almost 4 miles above sea level. But beyond that, climbing Chimborazo is actually fairly simple, according to experienced climbers. That makes it even more appealing to inexperienced and underqualified adventurers. It was precisely these types of adventurers who arrived at the 17,000-foot parking lot on the evening of Friday, October 22nd, 2021. A total of 16 people, none of them licensed or registered guides, checked into the Chimborazo refuge to try and get some sleep before getting up early the next day. The climbers awoke at the crack of dawn the following morning. They were greeted by an eerie silence and a spooky morning mist that permeated the desolate landscape all around them. In order to climb to Chimborazo's summit, you don't need to factor in a whole lot of logistics. Unlike other glacial mountains that require extreme amounts of route planning and preparation, you pretty much just go up Chimborazo in a mostly straight line. Thus, instead of taking days, it typically takes only about 7 to 8 hours. If most high-elevation mountain climbs are marathons, then Chimborazo is more like a sprint. These 16 climbers were clearly confident in their physical stamina and abilities, but they were overlooking something that is just as important. In the 3 days preceding their arrival, more than 2.5 feet of snow had fallen on Chimborazo. The climbing group was either unaware of this or unaware of the threat it posed. As they began their climb, the ground beneath their feet almost instantly turned from dirt to snow, then from soft snow to stiff ice. The grade of the ascent increased sharply too. The group had to navigate their way around scattered rocks while balancing their weight against the icy snowfall. The climbers were traveling in roped groups of 3. Sometime early that morning, close to the summit, the group of 3 at the very front of the pack unexpectedly triggered an avalanche. What happened next happened quickly and explosively. A huge mass of ice, rock, and debris came loose and coalesced into what was later estimated to be a Category D3 R4 avalanche. Translated, that means several thousand feet wide and moving with enough force to potentially destroy cars and wood-framed houses. This is not what any of the climbers were expecting that morning. Swept helplessly off their feet by the powerful avalanche, all were buried almost instantaneously. Firemen, police, and military special forces were all called to Chimborazo. They faced the urgent and monumental task of finding 16 people who had all just been scattered down the side of the nation's tallest mountain. With additional assistance from an organization called Ecuador Eco Adventure, workers were eventually able to rescue 7 people and bring them to safety. They also found 3 additional climbers who were seriously injured and transported them to a hospital, most likely in the nearest city of Ambato. Rescue workers, sadly, also found 3 dead bodies. That still left 3 additional people from the group of 16 that still hadn't been found by 4 p.m. that day, when bad weather forced the search to a halt. The 3 remaining climbers were never found. It is assumed by authorities that they were also killed. In total, the avalanche killed 6 people. Even more shocking than that, it did it in a way that was unusual even for an avalanche. When people are caught in avalanches, they typically face the biggest risk after being buried in snow and being unable to get out. But in the case of the Chimborazo avalanche, Ecuador Eco Adventure, who helped with the rescue mission, estimated that all 6 fatalities happened, quote, immediately. It makes gruesome sense that an avalanche that could potentially destroy cars and houses could have a similar effect on people who are in its path. This begs the question, however, why wasn't everyone killed? That question may never be answered. It happened so fast and so unexpectedly that the few who witnessed the event and lived to tell about it can only count themselves lucky. Following this epic disaster, a great deal of attention was paid to the fact that none of the 16 climbers had been licensed guides. Since 2012, it has been illegal in Ecuador to climb in the Andes Mountains without the accompaniment of a licensed registered guide. Many wondered why it was so easy for them to get to the mountain in the first place. This has also shed light on a problem Ecuador has been having for years with illegal, unlicensed guides offering lower prices for their services. This isn't only problematic because of the fact that the guide in charge doesn't actually know what they're doing. It's also problematic because the guide is incentivized to carry out the climb at high speed. That way, they can crank out more climbs overall and make the most of their cheaper pricing strategy. Authorities were unable to prove this conclusively, but suspected that at least one, if not more, of the 16 on the mountain that day were hired as guides, despite not having the proper legal qualifications. Following the event, the Ecuadorian government passed a sweeping temporary ban on all mountaineering all around the country above 5,000 meters, lower than even the parking lot at Chimborazo. The Ecuadorian Association of Mountain Guides also decided to introduce a new policy. They began posting bi-weekly reports on mountain conditions in the hopes that a future expedition like this one, which was apparently unaware of the heavy snowfall leading up to their trek, could be informed ahead of time and have their lives potentially saved. It's encouraging to see steps being taken to improve the safety of the climbing community in Ecuador. However, it seems like much of the danger still remains. It seems to be surprisingly, if not unbelievably, easy to get to massive mountains like Chimborazo without proper protocol stopping you. The deceptively straightforward nature of the climb and the allure of standing further away from the center of the earth than anywhere else don't help either. Chimborazo is a beautiful and geographically significant location. In an ideal world, enthusiasts would be able to climb it and revel in its beauty while being informed about the risks, and only doing so with proper training and proper guidance. But only time will tell if that will become a reality, or if we may soon witness another tragedy. We hope you enjoyed this video and found it informative. Tell us honestly, would you attempt to climb Chimborazo? If not, tell us why. And if so, tell us what you would do and how you would prepare given the risks and ease of access. Please, share your thoughts in the comments below. When most people think of Mount Everest, they think of one of the world's greatest natural wonders, a magical place to happily connect with nature and marvel at its beauty. But less than a decade ago, this world-famous landmark saw what is surely one of its least happy, least beautiful moments in modern history. Welcome to the 2014 avalanche disaster on Mount Everest. The lead-up. Every year, somewhere upwards of around 300 people come to Mount Everest with the goal of climbing to the top. The year 2014 was looking to be no exception, and workers were diligently making preparations for the start of the climbing season in May. Most of these workers were local Sherpas, Nepalese guides who can make 7 times Nepal's average annual income by accompanying visitors to the summit. In addition to helping climbers during climbing season, another responsibility that falls on the shoulders of the local Sherpas is planning a route. Since conditions are always changing, this means continually reanalyzing the state of the mountain, setting up new ropes, and anticipating new dangers. That year, 2014, and for a couple years prior, many experts, including Hymex mountaineer Russell Bryce, had noticed one area that was of particular concern: the Khumbu Icefall. This refers to a collection of huge columns of ice that loom about 18,000 feet up the side of the mountain. Paying attention to these imposing vertical ice blocks, which are called seracs, is a major part of the job of planning a route. Chunks of ice tend to break off, along with changes in weather and temperature. And, obviously, you want to try and get the expedition up and out of the way quickly during a time when the ice is less likely to rain down. One of the larger seracs, nearly 1,000 feet wide, was witnessed by Bryce in 2012 looking like a massive sword hanging over the climbing route. The climbing route had as many as 50 people crammed together underneath it at a time. Unsurprisingly, Bryce, who knew from experience how dangerous and unpredictable these giant seracs were, became extremely concerned about safety. His concerns eventually reached the point that he had his expedition company, Hymex, call off any future ascents for the time being. At the time, many people thought Bryce was overreacting. Unhappiest of all were Hymex clients who paid thousands of dollars to embark on the bucket list expedition, only to be sent home. One group that wasn't so critical of the decision was the Sherpas. Some had even helped convince Bryce that he needed to pull back, confessing to him that the conditions on the mountain were so treacherous they feared for their lives in a way they never had throughout many years of climbing experience. Bryce had even gone so far as to pull out a stopwatch and time some of the most skilled Sherpas as they passed through the Khumbu icefall. He found that when carrying a heavy load, it took them upwards of a half hour. Adding less experienced clients who the Sherpas would have to help along would only lengthen that time. And in Bryce's professional opinion, that was just too much time and too much of a risk. The event. Flash forward to 2014. The icefall was still a concern to Sherpas, but the plan devised in order to get climbers through it safely was to tackle it very early in the morning before sunrise. This is when temperatures are the coldest and the ice is least likely to melt and break off. One of the reasons Everest has a base camp is so climbers have the opportunity to acclimate to the extremely high elevation. Sometimes this process can take as long as 2 months. 2 months living in a tent at around 17,600 feet elevation. Visitors train their bodies by scaling sections of the mountain, then coming back down, essentially working their way up to a full ascent. This is important for multiple reasons. First of all, the Khumbu icefall is only about 400 feet above where base camp is located. This means that not only are climbers living for weeks in relatively close proximity to the most dangerous section of the entire mountain, they also have to pass through it over and over again as they continually scale the mountain up and down during the acclimation process. This is daunting for paying climbers, who, according to National Geographic, may pass through the Khumbu icefall a total of 6 to 8 times during the course of an Everest climb. However, it is significantly more daunting for Sherpas, who, during any given climbing season, may pass through the icefall as much as 40 times. Avalanches are so common at the icefalls that climbers staying at base camp can stand outside their tents during the daytime and simply watch them happen. The fact that Sherpas, who make their livings scaling these routes over and over again, can watch the world's biggest mountain seemingly fall apart over and over and still work up the courage to climb it again and again, well, let's just say they could be paid more for their work. Especially when you consider that, for Sherpas in particular, the Khumbu icefall is the #1 statistical killer. In the early morning hours of Friday, April 18th, 2014, about 25 men were at work along the south side of Mount Everest. Most of them were Sherpas, and they were fixing ropes for future paying climbers to use in the coming month. As heart-stopping footage captured just minutes before the disaster shows, many of the workers were scaling a large patch of ice by climbing one of the scariest-looking ladders you've ever seen. One of the Sherpas, a young man named Kaji, was even captured on camera speaking about how it was his 5th time on the mountain. Then, at around 6:45 a.m., it happened. All 25 of the working men were suddenly buried by ice. They were swept off their perches and sent tumbling. Imagine 25 people, slightly more than all the players on the field during the World Cup, all falling down a cliff in complete unison. What had happened was a 113-foot serac weighing 31.5 million pounds had broken off of the Khumbu icefall. This caused a catastrophically huge avalanche, the largest that had ever been recorded at Mount Everest at the time. Onlookers down at base camp looked on in amazement as a tremendous cloud of snow erupted along the side of the mountain. The roar was described as being like the sound of thunder. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, it all stopped, and all that was left was eerie silence. The aftermath. It was immediately obvious that the workers who had been on the mountainside were now in serious trouble, and nobody from the group was responding over the radio. Rescue helicopters flew to the scene, but the rescue operation, as you might imagine, would prove difficult, time-consuming, and risky. After 48 hours of digging through snow and exploring up and down the cliffside, workers had eventually found 9 people who had been injured in the avalanche. 3 were severely injured and in life-threatening condition, but all 9 were still alive. They were promptly airlifted away, eventually taken to the Nepalese capital of Kathmandu. But that's not all they found. Horrifically, workers had also found 13 other people, all of them Sherpas, who were dead. This made the avalanche the deadliest that had ever occurred until that time on Mount Everest, in addition to being the largest. Among the dead was Kaji, a man captured on video only minutes before the avalanche. This accounted for 22 of the 25 workers who had been on the mountain when the avalanche hit. But even after 48 hours, nobody had seen or heard anything from the other 3. That status would continue. In fact, the bodies of the 3 missing workers are still located somewhere on Mount Everest today. Following the horrible avalanche that destroyed lives and traumatized many others, the Nepalese government generated controversy when it only offered families of the dead Sherpas enough money to cover their funeral costs. The Nepal Mountaineering Association dismissed the offering, and Sherpas all across the mountains of Nepal were furious. This ignited a public dialogue about Sherpas being the unsung heroes of Everest climbing expeditions, and how many were now arguing that resources provided were often inadequate. Numerous Sherpas who worked on Mount Everest threatened to go on strike unless improvements were made to insurance policies and government subsidies, and if the families of the avalanche victims were not paid $10,000 instead of the $400 they were initially offered. Several changes were eventually implemented as a result of the 2014 Everest avalanche disaster. First, the Nepalese government eventually agreed to pay $10,000, and then another $5,100 to victims' families. Also, a year later, the route, which had largely been the same as the route first plotted by Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay all the way back in 1953, was also changed in an attempt to better avoid the dangerous Khumbu icefalls. When natural disasters strike and kill hundreds of innocent people, it tends to make international news. But you'd be surprised how many of these disasters you've never heard of. Such is the case with the Chamoli disaster. Depending on where you live and how much time you spend reading the news, there is a solid possibility you've never heard of the Chamoli disaster before. Yet this is a disaster that claimed hundreds of lives, caused major devastation to valuable infrastructure, and happened fairly recently in the year 2021. This is the unbelievable true story of the Chamoli disaster. February 7th, 2021 started out like any other day for the 500,000 plus residents of the Chamoli district in northern India. The Chamoli district is located in the state of Uttarakhand, a region famous for housing most of India's share of the Himalayas. It is also a very holy place for Hindus. Many of the religion's most valued temples and shrines are located in Uttarakhand, making it a pilgrimage destination for practicing Hindus. Another important thing to know about Uttarakhand is that it is generally quite rural, and the region is not naturally well endowed with land or energy resources. However, thanks to rivers that are mostly fed by snow from the Himalayas, Uttarakhand has been making aggressive moves towards using hydroelectric power in recent decades. This is important because generating hydroelectric power involves building huge dams. In the years leading up to the Chamoli disaster, scientists had been growing increasingly concerned about these dams. Despite their warnings, the Indian government mostly ignored them, which, as we'll soon see, turned out to be a tremendous mistake. Unbeknownst to local residents, trouble first began way up high, atop the colossal mountain in Uttarakhand and one of the tallest mountains in the world. Nanda Devi stands at a colossal 25,600 feet. The mountain is designated as a UNESCO World Heritage Site and has its own surrounding national park. That day, February 7th, warming temperatures caused an enormous chunk of rock and ice to become dislodged. And when I say enormous, I mean enormous. Later analysis done by satellite would reveal that the chunk was roughly the length of 15 football fields and the width of 5 football fields. You could have built a small civilization on this thing. But of course your small civilization would have been doomed because in a flash this incredible mass of debris all came loose at once. Unless you'd been down in the valley watching with binoculars, you and the rest of Uttarakhand's 11 million residents would have had no idea that anything out of the ordinary was happening. It was just a regular, bright and sunny day. But as luck would have it, the fact that it was bright and sunny turned out to be seriously bad news. As the massive avalanche made its way down the high mountain slopes, it began to melt. This created exactly the kind of nightmare scenarios scientists had been trying to warn Indian officials about. A heavy, rapid onslaught of icy gray water descended upon the villages below, faster than anybody had time to react. It quickly entered the Daliganga River Valley, one of the region's main waterways. Multiple hydroelectric dams were located along this waterway. One of them was the Tapovan Dam, part of the Rishiganga project. This expensive dam and the surrounding project were in danger of suffering serious damage due to all the excess water heading its way. But to say that the melted snow from Nanda Devi merely damaged the Tapovan Dam would be an understatement. Rather than simply stress it or overload it, it erased the Tapovan Dam off the face of the earth entirely. Nearly 40 workers who had been inside a 12 by 15 foot tunnel suddenly found themselves inside the largest, coldest, and least fun water slide any of them had ever ridden. Making things even less fun was the fact that the water was full of debris. The debris included huge chunks of rock, as well as bridges, houses, walls, sheep, goats, and human body parts, all thrashing at increasingly high speed. Several major bridges got swallowed by the flood. These were bridges that local officials had thought were built way higher than the water could ever possibly go. The highest bridge had been built a whopping 40 feet above typical water levels. In total, 5 bridges were destroyed. This rendered no less than 13 local villages inaccessible. This dramatically disrupted local transportation routes at a time when local people would have been very keen to use them. Trapped in their villages, watching in horror as expensive industrial projects got decimated, many of the people of Uttarakhand had no choice but to be swept away. Swept away with them was also the Daliganga Dam, which sat at the confluence of 2 major rivers in the valley. For workers trying to flee to safety and local officials trying desperately to figure out how to mitigate the torrential flooding, the disintegration of this second huge dam was not helpful. The water went on to furiously destroy multiple hydroelectric projects entirely. This included a particularly large and expensive project owned by India's National Thermal Power Corporation. More than 170 people were on site working there when the flood struck. Indian authorities were afraid that the water might reach as far as the city of Haridwar, and numerous villages miles away were all mandatorily evacuated. They also made what might seem at first like an insane decision. They decided to deliberately empty other dams that were further downstream. The reason they did this was so that when the floodwaters arrived, the dams would meet them with an empty stomach and hopefully have enough room to avoid overflowing. This worked. The destructive flood was eventually halted. But now came the scary part, assessing the damage. The damage caused by this one melted Himalayan glacier was astonishing. More than 200 people were missing, and wherever they'd gone off to, it probably wasn't good. 140 of them were workers from the Tapovan hydropower plant. 30 workers remained trapped inside the water slide from hell, which was now just a tunnel buried under debris. They would remain stuck there for an additional 6 days. A truly massive rescue operation got underway, involving more than 600 rescue workers and volunteers. Sifting through the grisly damage took months.
By May of 2021, it was reported that 83 bodies had been found. They also found 36 body parts. Rescuers also weren't just finding human body parts. They also found the remains of sheep and goats, which had presumably belonged to a total of 5 shepherds who were also missing in the flood. It was estimated that a total of 180 farm animals were swept away. Damage caused by the flood continued to haunt local infrastructure in the months following it. In the village of Jashimeth, as recently as January of 2023, locals evacuated hundreds of homes after cracks started appearing in walls. A local temple also collapsed, due in part to damage from extreme weather events such as the Chamoli disaster. The people of northern India were more than just devastated by this tragedy. They were also really pissed off. Scientists had pleaded with the government not to build dams just like the ones that ended up being destroyed by the flood and making it 10 times worse. Specifically, they had urged for no dams to be built in the periglacial zone, meaning in valleys where the base elevation is more than 7,000 feet above sea level. The government responded to these warnings by building unusually wide and smooth freeways all over the hills of Uttarakhand so even more people could come and apply for hydroelectric jobs. They also built multiple hydroelectric projects in the very same periglacial zones the experts explicitly told them not to. Residents of a small village called Reni, which was brutally damaged by the eventual flooding, had expressed concerns about the dams when they were still under construction. Building them involved major explosive blasting of rocks in the area. This blasting did more than make Reni's residents unable to sleep or hear themselves think. It also caused the village of Reni itself to start moving. According to the headman of the village, during the course of the construction project, a total of about half of the entire village slid precipitously as if it was about to crumble in a deadly landslide. The people of Reni had politely requested to be given permission to relocate. But over the deafening roar of the construction of their expert-not-approved village landslide-causing dams, the government apparently did not hear the sound of their request. In the end, the Chamoli disaster was more than just a remarkably destructive tragedy. Like many significant disasters throughout history, it stands as an inflection point in the ongoing tension between industry and the climate change that industry continues to cause. Temperatures have been rising concerningly quickly in the Himalayas for years, and indeed, it was rising temperatures that not only caused the glacier to break off, but then caused it to melt and turn it into an epic flood. Add to that the disregard for expert advice displayed by local officials, and this becomes an almost biblical tale of climate change gone wrong. What's amazing is that while this story certainly got plenty of news coverage, including in Western media outlets such as the New York Times and Scientific American, I'd never heard of it before. It's possible you had, but I'd bet there's a good chance you hadn't either. Hopefully, this video can help to change that, as it seems like a very underrated story in terms of both the tragic loss of life and also how relevant it is in the context of today's global issues. People are often surprised to learn that fishing is one of the most dangerous jobs in the world. More surprising still, the same danger also often applies when it comes to fishing for sport. In the United States, fishing accounts for nearly 1/10 of all sports-related injuries around the country. Sport fishing doesn't get any safer across the rest of the world either. In Australia, rock fishing is the #1 most deadly sport, period. And in the eastern state of New South Wales, rock fishers have been risking their lives in one of the most dangerous areas on the planet for rock fishing, Honeycomb Rocks at Port Kembla. For many, the risk is not paying off. In fact, in just the last 2 years, 6 people have been killed in this one location. Yet despite this, and despite some highly conspicuous signs posted by desperate officials, rock fishers continue to visit the area. So, what makes Honeycomb Rocks so dangerous? And what makes it such a good rock fishing spot that dozens continue to risk their lives to fish there? Let's dive into the recent history of fatalities here and see if we can find some answers. Port Kembla, the port which houses the fabled Honeycomb Rocks, is the largest motor vehicle importation terminal in New South Wales. They also export lots of grain and play a big role in mining and steel, both of which are big business here. If you hadn't assumed so already, Port Kembla is also a town. it's quite small, only about 5,000 residents as of the 2016 Australian census. However, this tiny locale on the bottom right corner of the land down under gets an outsized amount of attention, thanks to its wider popularity with the fishing community, many of whom travel from far and wide to dip their hooks in the port's waters. According to a Facebook group I found, which has significantly more members than the entire population of Port Kembla, this particular area is a unique waterway where fishing enthusiasts have a chance to catch species of fish they have never caught before and may never catch again. The port is roughly 100 kilometers south of Sydney. Its coastline faces southeast towards the Tasman Sea, known locally as the Ditch, which separates Australia and New Zealand. For most of the world's population, this is an extremely remote far corner of the ocean, and if you love fishing enough, you might find yourself traveling hundreds or even thousands of miles just to see what you can find buried underneath its deep blue surface. Making the area even more appealing are the rock formations that line the coast, making it so you don't need to climb onto any boat or pack any motion sickness pills to cast your line into the water. All you've got to do is walk out toward the edge of the cliff and start fishing. How dangerous could that be? Well, as it turns out, catastrophically. Unlike the local population, the waves at Honeycomb Rocks in Port Kembla are not small. They are, in fact, really, really big, and fairly unpredictable too. Without warning, the hostile ocean will reach up and swat people off the cliffside like flies, swallowing them whole. This has apparently been happening for a long time, but with a name like Honeycomb, the rocks just don't seem dangerous to the people who walk out onto them. Looking at maps and photographs online, the rocks look relatively flat and like they cover a wide area, so no risky climbing and very little apparent risk of falling over any edges, given the generous space. What nobody expects are the waves. With shocking regularity, this backfires. In March 2009, Wan Ook Lee and his son Dennis were fishing at Honeycomb Rocks. Both were from nearby Sydney, and both were experienced rock fishermen. All was going well until, without warning, a giant wave erupted over them, consuming both of them in sea foam. It not only knocked the men off their feet, it pulled them off of the rocks altogether and out into the ocean. Dennis eventually got his bearings and resurfaced. He tread water while looking for any sign of his father, but after 15 minutes, he hadn't seen him. At that point, a rescue helicopter arrived and pulled Dennis to safety. His father, 71-year-old Wan Ook Lee, was never found. This tragic accident rocked the small town of Port Kembla, but it wouldn't take long at all for the story to repeat itself. In July 2009, just a few months after the death of Wan Ook Lee, a 33-year-old man from Marrickville named Min Loy Truong suddenly disappeared after standing out on Honeycomb Rocks. It seems likely he was also rock fishing, but all authorities were ever able to recover from the sea were some of his clothes and his wallet. It was determined that he, too, had been suddenly swept away by a rogue wave. The following year, a man from the New South Wales city of Yagoona was rock fishing at Honeycomb Rocks. His name was Han Fei Cho, and despite the fact that according to his friends he was not a strong swimmer, the 43-year-old was out on the rocks without a life jacket, a testament to how deceptively safe the area seems to be to most people. You can probably guess what happened next. Just when he least expected it, poor Han Fei Cho was standing in the shadow of a ferocious wave. The ocean swallowed him, fishing rod and all, ending his life in the blink of an eye. Despite at least 3 major incidents occurring within the last year, it only took 1 month for the waves to claim their next victim. This time, it wasn't at Honeycomb Rocks, but at a blowhole a few miles down the coast with a similar rocky outcrop popular with the fishing community. The same waves roil here as well, and what happened added to the same growing concern about the safety, or lack thereof, involved in rock fishing in the area. A trio of rock fishing friends was suddenly cut down to 2 when a huge wave came and swept 41-year-old Hiki Kim off his feet and into the water. Unlike Han Fei Cho, Kim was considered to be a strong swimmer, but nevertheless he was gone. This is as good of a time as any to ask the question, why do even strong swimmers still succumb to the waves off the coast of Port Kembla? It's one thing to be swept off your feet and thrown into the water, but it's another thing to then drown in the water afterward. One terrifying reason why this might happen is that it isn't just the waves along the shoreline that can be volatile. The Tasman Sea as a whole is actually one of the roughest bodies of water in the entire world. New Zealand, Australia's neighbor on the other side of the Tasman Sea, boasts some of the tallest waves you'll ever see on this planet. In 2018, a rescue helicopter, which was presumably quite busy that day, spotted a wave in the Tasman Sea that measured a whopping 120 feet high. That's roughly big enough to engulf Brazil's famous Christ the Redeemer statue. The Tasman Sea is violent like this because it sits at the meeting point between the Pacific Ocean and the Southern Sea around Antarctica, two massive oceans with very different water temperatures. The result is a whirlwind of activity that makes the ditch one of the most notoriously difficult places to sail. It's also not always a great place to swim, especially if the swim is unplanned. This is what Hiki Kim sadly discovered in May of 2010, like numerous unfortunate rock fissures before him. It was after the death of Hiki Kim that the New South Wales Coroner's Court decided something needed to be done. The Coroner's Court is a government organization put in charge of investigating sudden or unexplained deaths. Honeycomb Rocks in Port Kembla was starting to look like a good place for them to conduct an investigation, so they did. As you might imagine, the investigation revealed that while these deaths were quite sudden, they certainly weren't unexplained. The local government moved to set up angel rings, often referred to in other places as life preservers, around the area. They also produced educational content in various languages about the dangers. The deputy state coroner at the time also recommended that it be mandatory for rock fishers to wear life jackets. At the time this video was produced, rock fishers are still not legally required to wear life jackets or other important safety equipment, such as specially designed rock fishing boots, when fishing in Port Kembla. Calls have grown louder in the last couple of years after 7 new people have been killed at this one location. The date was January 22nd, 2021, a Friday. For Australians, this is the middle of the summer, and in Port Kembla, the average day in January is a California-like 78 degrees Fahrenheit. Sure, it's a lot more humid and tends to rain more often, but that Friday there was no rain, and people were out and about. A group of 3, one 69-year-old man from Campsie and 2 men in their mid and late 40s from Green Valley, were all swept off of Honeycomb Rocks with their fishing rods in hand. The older man was wearing a life jacket, but the life jacket was black, making it hard for rescue workers to see. All 3 men drowned. Along with them, 2 other rock fishers were swept away by the same wave but survived, re-emerging from the waves with only minor injuries. The event was so sudden and so dramatic that nobody at the scene was sure how many people had been swept away. It was only after days had passed with no reports of any additional missing people that the authorities concluded it had been no more than those 5. There had been about a dozen people fishing on the rocks in total when the wave hit. This all happened only 24 hours after another fisherman, who had been fishing at Coffs Harbour on the north coast of New South Wales, had also been swept away by the sea and drowned. This made for no doubt one of the bloodiest weeks in Australian fishing history. Less than a month later, the death count would shoot upward once again. 3 men fishing at Honeycomb Rocks on Friday, February 12th, were all suddenly assaulted by a deadly wave. All 3 vanished into the water below, right around 7 p.m. Determined to prevent yet another tragedy at this same location, New South Wales quickly sent out an ambulance crew, an inflatable rescue boat, a rescue helicopter, and the police all to the scene in Port Kembla. One highway patrol officer named Nick Park leapt into the water and proceeded to swim a distance of more than 300 feet through roiling waves until he reached where 2 of the men were. All 3, the officer and the 2 men he had located, were picked up by the rescue boat. Meanwhile, the 3rd fisherman was winched out of the water by the rescue helicopter and sent straight away to the hospital, where, unfortunately, doctors were unable to save him from his injuries and he eventually died. The rescue boat landed at Port Kembla Beach, and ambulance workers began attempting to perform CPR on one of the rescued fishermen. Sadly, this was to no avail, and he was pronounced dead at the scene. However, thanks to the heroic efforts of Aquaman, the Australian Highway Patrol officer, and the rest of the rescue team, the other fishermen in the rescue boat did actually survive. The waves were so deadly that day that 2 other police officers who were merely out spotting for the rescue helicopter were also hit by a powerful wave, and both sustained minor injuries. After all the chaos had finally simmered down, local authorities somberly added 2 more to the 2021 death count at Honeycomb Rocks, for a total of 5 so far that year, and it was only February. Possibly due to word of the tragic mayhem spreading around the fishing community, the deaths stopped for the remainder of 2021. But in 2022, just a few months into the year, Honeycomb Rocks would claim its next, and to date most recent, casualty. Brendan Hurd was from a suburb in New South Wales called Berkeley. Hurd was just 19 years old, and he was out fishing at Honeycomb Rocks with 2 friends on the afternoon of Monday, April 25th, 2022. As it had already happened so many times before, the young Hurd and his 2 fishing buddies were all abruptly and unexpectedly swallowed by a surging wave. Hurd's two friends, one of whom was 17 and the other of whom was 50, both managed to swim their way out of the writhing, angry waters. They were eventually pulled to shore with minor injuries by other people who had seen the drama unfold, but Brendan Hurd was nowhere to be seen. It would take another 2 days before rescue crews would finally recover his body, confirming the young man had heartbreakingly become the 6th person since 2021 to die at Honeycomb Falls. Australian MP Paul Scully posted on Facebook after Hurd's death that enough is enough. He called for making life jackets mandatory at the location and for greater effort to be put into a public awareness campaign. The post included a photo of a warning sign posted at Honeycomb Rocks with the death toll since 2021 ticked at 5. Of course, shortly after the post was made, the sign would be updated to 6. Looking across just the last decade or so, when the public has first started to become more broadly aware of what's going on, the sheer lethality of this place is astonishing. Not only does it kill at a high rate, but it often seems to take lives in batches, sweeping whole handfuls of unsuspecting fishermen into the abyss. Something this powerful and this terrifying you'd think would get more recognition among the community, but it appears to be an ongoing dilemma for local officials to compel better safety practices. Nick Reinberger of ABC News traveled to Honeycomb Rocks in June of 2022 and interviewed some of the people who were fishing there at the time. He found that, even still, many were unaware that the Weather Service had issued a dangerous surf report for the area. He also noticed that, among a group of 6, they only had 1 life jacket. Nobody was wearing rock fishing boots either. A volunteer at the nearby marine rescue station he spoke to also pointed out that everyone was wearing black, which would make them harder to find in the event of a rescue. We can only hope that this video can help spread awareness about the dangers of fishing at Honeycomb Rocks. In an ideal world, fishing enthusiasts would still be able to reap the benefits of this beautiful location, offering loads of unique catches, while coming fully prepared with the proper equipment and paying careful attention to the weather reports ahead of time. Maybe then, over time, Honeycomb Rocks could eventually become as harmless as its name suggests. In 2015, the Santana family was excited for a fun adventure. They packed their bags, grabbed their cameras, and headed out to explore Washington's famous Big Four ice caves. But what started as a happy family outing turned into a chilling nightmare. A crack echoed through the cave, and then chaos. Join us in this story to know what happened to the Santana family at Big Four ice caves. The Big Four ice caves are located in the northwest part of Washington state. They are about an hour and 30 minutes away from Seattle by car. Washington state is close to Canada. Big Four Mountain is a mountain in the Cascade Range of Washington state. It is located 21 miles east of the town of Granite Falls. The mountain stands about 6,180 feet tall. One of the most interesting features of Big Four Mountain is its steep north face, which is 4,200 feet high. At the bottom of this steep face, debris piles up due to avalanches. These debris piles can stay there all year round because the mountain provides continuous shade, preventing the debris from melting completely. The ice at the base of the mountain forms the lowest elevation glacier in the lower 49 states. This glacier is found at an elevation between 2,450 feet and 1,950 feet. During the summer, streams of melting snow flow beneath the debris piles. These streams cause caves to form in the ice, creating the famous ice caves at Big Four Mountain. You might think the temperatures around the Big Four ice caves are very cold, and they are compared to other parts of the United States. However, because the Pacific Ocean is so close, there is not a big difference in temperatures throughout the year. In the summer, temperatures rarely go above 80 degrees Fahrenheit, and in the winter, they can drop into the 30s at night. When the temperatures reach the 70s and 80s, it's a great time for people to get outside and enjoy the beautiful outdoors. Most people know about Mount Rainier, and for good reason, but there are many other trails and places to see in Washington state. The ice caves are located at the bottom of an avalanche chute on the north face of Big Four Mountain. This is a small area where snow and water have worn away a path through the rock, creating a pool of ice at the bottom. The melting snow and wind from avalanches have formed 3,100 feet of caves that stay icy all year because of the shade from the mountain. The caves are special because the temperatures are just right to make pieces of the ice cave melt and fall, creating new parts and shapes inside the ice. Every winter, new snow falls and adds to the structure of the caves. This cycle of melting snow and ice, followed by new snow, happens year after year, making the ice caves a fascinating place to visit. To visit one of Washington's most famous outdoor spots, you would start your hike at the trailhead of the Big Four Ice Caves Trail. The Big Four Ice Caves Trail is a well-known hiking path that has been named a National Recreation Trail. It is also called Trail Number 723. This trail is one of the most popular hikes in the Mount Baker-Snoqualmie National Forest. It is known for being an easy hike and is a little over 2.3 miles for a round trip. Every year, more than 50,000 people come to hike this trail. On busy days, several hundred hikers might use the trail. Because it is so popular, the trailhead has 2 separate parking areas. The entire hike takes about 30 minutes to reach the caves and another 30 minutes to get back to the parking lot. However, these parking lots often fill up quickly. When the parking areas are full, hikers sometimes have to park along the nearby Mountain Loop Road. This shows just how many people love to visit and hike the Big Four Ice Caves Trail. One important thing to know is that there is no cell phone signals during the hike. This means you cannot call or text anyone while you are on the trail. If you were hiking the trail today, you would see many warning signs telling you to stay out of the caves. These warning signs are there to keep people safe. However, in 2010, when John Tam and Tamami Okayoki visited the caves with their 2 kids, these warning signs were not in their original places. This lack of warning signs was dangerous for visitors. So, while the Big Four Ice Caves Trail is a beautiful and popular hike, it is very important to follow all the safety warnings and signs to stay safe. In 2010, the weather was warm. This warm weather caused a large chunk of ice, about the size of a small truck, to break away from the main structure of the ice caves. Sadly, this piece of ice hit 11-year-old Grace Tam. Grace was standing 20 feet away from the cave, waiting for her parents to take a photo, when the ice struck her. Unfortunately, Grace passed away later that day. After this tragic accident, Grace's family and the state of Washington created a memorial for her. They also made sure that plenty of warning signs were put up in the correct places to prevent such accidents from happening again. These signs are meant to keep people safe by warning them about the dangers of going into the caves. However, even with all the warning signs, every year there are hundreds, if not thousands, of people who still enter the caves. This shows that it is very important to pay attention to the safety signs and stay out of the caves to avoid any more tragic accidents. In July of 2015, a family from California visited the Big Four Ice Caves in Washington state. Annalisa Santana, who was 34 years old, came with her 4 children and her fiancé Dustin Wilson. They were joined by Annalisa's 25-year-old brother, David Santana. The Santanas were on a family vacation to Washington, a place where Annalisa and David had spent their early years and had fond memories of exploring the outdoors. Annalisa was excited to share her love for Washington with her children and wanted them to experience the beauty of the state firsthand. The Big Four Ice Caves had come highly recommended by local residents and had received great reviews online. Because of all the positive feedback, Annalisa and David decided it was a must-see attraction during their family trip. David, who was also married and had 2 children with another on the way, shared Annalisa's enthusiasm for showing their kids the wonders of Washington. Together, they looked forward to creating new memories and enjoying the unique experience of exploring the ice caves. If you have kids, you know how challenging it can be sometimes. Imagine taking 4 children on a 2-mile hike, even if it's considered an easy one. It definitely sounds like a daunting task, but despite the potential difficulties, Annalisa saw it as a wonderful opportunity for her family to bond and explore the caves together. After about 30 minutes of walking, they finally reached the Big Four Ice Caves. The caves stood out starkly with their white icy texture contrasting against the massive rock they were nestled against. This contrast is especially striking in the summer when the caves are the only patches of ice and snow around. At the base of the structure, several caves opened up, disappearing into the darkness of the ice. As they approached, they couldn't help but notice the crowd of people. Some individuals were climbing onto the ice and venturing into the caves, despite numerous signs warning against it. These signs clearly stated the dangers and advised visitors to stay out of the caves to avoid accidents. Annalisa and David, along with their family, approached the Big Four Ice Caves. They noticed the large number of people going inside the ice caves, which convinced them to enter the cave after taking a few pictures from outside. Once entered in the cave, they were struck by the beauty of the blue ice and the cave's inner beauty. However, they also felt a deep chill that seemed to seep into their bones. The caves were much colder inside compared to the warm temperatures outside. Everything looked normal and fine from the outside. Lots of hikers were still heading towards the caves, and many people stopped to snap photos at the cave entrance. But, as happens in many tales, the scene can change within a moment. One second, everything feels normal and safe. The next second, chaos can sweep in like a sudden storm, catching everyone by surprise. From outside the cave, everything was perfect, while hikers were taking pictures and enjoying the day. Suddenly, a faint crack stabbed the air. It was so quiet at first, just a distant sound, but then the ground began to shake. Before anyone could react, chunks of ice, some as big as large trucks, started falling down from the cave ceiling. Ice and snow flew in all directions upon impact, creating chaos and panic among those nearby. The whole terrifying event takes only moments, but it felt much longer. The rising temperatures since May had weakened the ice over time until, on that fateful July 6th, it could no longer support the weight above. Inside the cave, Annalisa and David, along with their families and several other tourists, were exploring when they heard the initial crack. They instinctively tried to find cover, shielding themselves behind whatever rocks they could reach. Sadly, there wasn't enough time. Annalisa was hit by a huge piece of falling ice and lost her life instantly. Her brother David, standing nearby, was also hit and nearly knocked unconscious by the force of the impact. In the midst of all the chaos, those who managed to avoid getting hurt looked up in disbelief and fear. It was a heartbreaking and terrifying moment. The peaceful exploration of the caves turned into a sudden tragedy that shook everyone who was there. The shock and horror of what happened lingered in the air, leaving everyone deeply saddened and stunned by the sudden loss and the unexpected turn of events. Inside the cave, the scene was frightening and shocking. The first thing everyone saw was a lot of ice spread across the cave floor. Some people lay there crying out in pain with broken bones and other injuries. But what scared everyone the most was the silence from those who didn't say anything. Several people were died by the impact, and many others were severely hurt. Among them was Dustin, Annalisa's fiancé, whose leg had injured. With the help of others, he managed to get out of the cave along with David and Annalisa's 4 children. However, they were now missing one family member. With no cell phone network inside the cave, it was impossible to call for help right away. It took over 30 minutes for a couple of hikers to reach their vehicle, and another 14 minutes to find a phone and alert the authorities about the incident. It was a tense and heartbreaking situation. The families and rescuers faced a race against time to get help for those injured and unconscious inside the cave. The lack of communication made the situation even more desperate as they struggled to reach out to emergency services and coordinate a rescue operation. As we often observed in other incidents like this, the immediate time right after the accident is incredibly important. Waiting 45 minutes after the cave collapsed could truly mean the difference between life and death. Simply put, it's a failure on the part of the state not to have an emergency phone closer to the cave. After the call for help, a rescue helicopter was dispatched to the cave. The first person airlifted was David Santana, who was barely conscious due to severe injuries from the impact. Dustin, Annalisa's fiancé, and all 4 of her children were taken to the hospital as well. Dustin needed surgery on his leg, but thankfully, he and Annalisa's kids all recovered fully. Sadly, David's condition didn't improve. He battled for his life in the intensive care unit for 3 long months, but he couldn't overcome his severe injuries. It's devastating to say that David didn't make it. He left behind his wife and 3 children, leaving his family and friends in deep sorrow. The loss of David weighs heavily on everyone who knew him. His passing is a reminder of the fragility of life and the suddenness with which tragedy can strike. Annalisa and David were known as loving and caring individuals, especially when it came to their families. They had big hearts, and their desire to create lasting memories for their children shines through in this story. Unfortunately, life can take a sudden turn in a mere moment. It took 2 days before Annalisa's body could be safely recovered from the depths of the caves. The rescue operation was painstakingly slow and careful, as teams had to be cautious of the cave's unstable conditions. There was a constant fear of another collapse, adding tension to the already difficult task. Fortunately, despite the challenges, the rescue teams managed to retrieve Annalisa's body without further incidents. The loss of Annalisa and David is deeply felt by their family and the community. Their tragic fate shows us how quickly life can change and the importance of safety in outdoor adventures. The Big Four ice caves remained closed for several months while the state reviewed how to improve safety for the public. Eventually, they started installing emergency phones closer to the caves. This way, if there's another collapse, rescue teams can respond much faster. They also added more warning signs, urging tourists to stay out of the caves. However, it's not against the law to enter, so every year, thousands of hikers still take the risk. 2 lives were tragically lost, and families were forever changed. While these changes are necessary, they may not be enough to prevent another accident. It's unsettling to think that such a tragedy could happen again. It's a reminder of the delicate balance between enjoying nature's beauty and ensuring everyone's safety. The state can only do so much to protect visitors, but more needs to be done to make sure everyone can explore safely without risking their lives. The once happy family vacation turned into a nightmare in a blink of an eye. Annalisa and David, full of love and excitement, were gone, leaving their families heartbroken. The silence after the chaos was deafening, filled with a heavy sadness that lingered in the air. Even though Dustin and the children bravely healed from their injuries, losing their mother and uncle left a big hole in their lives. David's wife and kids now have to deal with the sudden loss of a husband and father. The absence of loved ones in such a tragic way is really hard, changing their families forever and leaving a lasting emotional impact on everyone involved. The Big Four ice caves, once a symbol of natural wonder, became a chilling reminder of the dangers that lurk beneath the surface. Even with new safety measures, a question hangs heavy. Will it be enough? Is this beautiful yet treacherous place worth the risk? The answer lies with every adventurer who dares to approach its icy embrace. But one thing is certain. Safety should never be an afterthought. So, before you embark on your next outdoor adventure, remember Annalisa and David. Remember the thrill of exploration, but also the importance of caution, because in the face of nature's raw power, even the most well-intended plans can take a tragic turn.
Like most national parks, Zion National Park in southern Utah is a popular destination for families and nature lovers. Its desert canyon geography makes the park uniquely beautiful, but it also imposes some risks, largely due to otherworldly landscapes that most outsiders probably aren't familiar with. Surely one of the most uncanny is a mystifying 16-mile stretch of canyon called the Narrows. Almost like a Venus flytrap, this alluring natural marvel attracts visitors from far and wide, many of whom probably don't realize how vulnerable venturing into this long, narrow canyon leaves them. In recent years, on multiple occasions, the worst outcomes of this vulnerability have turned into reality. Pinned between towering cliffs, exposed to the elements, and with only one way out, no small number of people have died in the heart of this iconic national park. This is the story of the recent fatal tragedies that have struck in the Narrows. On Tuesday, November 22, 2022, a 31-year-old woman and her 33-year-old husband visited Zion National Park for an overnight hiking trip. In order to hike through the infamous 16-mile Narrows, you have to be among only 90 people who are allowed in per day by the park. That day, the woman and her husband were among the 90, having booked their reservation several months in advance. Their plan was to begin hiking in the afternoon on Tuesday. They would then make the 16-mile journey and emerge back out from the canyon on Wednesday morning, meaning they would not only be venturing through the Narrows, they would be in the Narrows overnight. The Narrows, it should be said, are aptly named. The walls can reach as high as 1,000 feet on either side, yet the river between can be as narrow as just 20 feet wide. The only thing this really can be compared to is like being in a small alleyway in the heart of Manhattan or Hong Kong. On that fateful Tuesday evening in November of 2022, our two intrepid visitors would have surely marveled at the monumental scale of the site. And, thanks to their journey being overnight, the incredible and very un-Manhattan-like clarity of the night sky above. But everything soon went to hell. During an average November, Zion National Park has an average low temperature of 37 degrees Fahrenheit. But on the night of November 22, 2022, the park plummeted to an unexpected 14 degrees Fahrenheit. 14 degrees is well below the threshold at which crippling emergencies like hypothermia and frostbite can start to take effect. Although both visitors would have known it would be cold, they likely did not expect or prepare for it to be as frigid as it was. This is where the wonder of the Narrows quickly turned into horror. Pinned between 1,000-foot rock walls that stretch and wind for miles and miles in either direction, there is no quick way to escape, and no quick way for help to reach you.
The dangerously cold conditions are also not at all mitigated by the fact that what's between the rock walls is a river. Having to trudge through shallow water slows you down. It also makes you even colder and even more vulnerable. Late that night, or technically very early Wednesday morning, the husband decided something had to be done. They were so cold they were both starting to show signs of hypothermia. He realized they needed help, and fast. He began to make his way toward the end of the Narrows. His wife stayed behind, bundling up as much as she possibly could. Sloshing and stomping through freezing cold river water and trembling uncontrollably as his hypothermia worsened, he eventually reached a trail called the Riverside Walk. The Riverside Walk is sometimes called the gateway to the Narrows and serves as the entry point if you're hiking in from the opposite direction. He was able to attract the attention of some other park visitors who then flagged down a shuttle. This led to the Zion National Park Search and Rescue Team being called. The rescue team immediately recognized the severe hypothermic condition the man was in and had him sent directly to the Zion Emergency Operations Center. Then, the team quickly descended into the Narrows to try and locate the man's wife. Eventually, they found her. Her hypothermia had accelerated to such an extreme point that she was now totally unresponsive. Rescue workers performed CPR, but after several attempts, she was pronounced dead. The fact that such a tranquil walk through the wilderness could have turned into such a painful and deadly nightmare so quickly was a traumatic shock beyond description. But whether they were aware of it or not, the misfortune of the couple in November of 2022 was preceded by other shocking and deadly events that happened quite recently in the exact same stretch of tall, narrow canyon. Just 3 months earlier, a 29-year-old woman from Tucson, Arizona was hiking the Narrows with some friends. Her name was Jital Agnihotri. Jital was a dedicated and well-respected graduate student at the University of Arizona's Department of Hydrology and Atmospheric Sciences. On Friday, August 19, 2022, at about 2:15 p.m., park rangers began receiving reports of something which, no matter how experienced they were, must have been unbelievable to hear. A monsoon was underway, and a massive flood was raging through the park. As you can probably already guess, the Narrows is pretty much the worst place on Earth to be if a flood is coming. Jital and her friends were hiking through the Narrows when the onslaught of water came roaring through. It was later revealed to be an increase of more than 8,000 gallons of water. The flood knocked large pieces of rock wall loose, dislodged trees, and swept everyone in its path off their feet. Jital and her friends were separated. Chilling footage captured that day appears to show Jital and an unidentified man clinging to a fallen tree as they are quickly swept along the Narrows. The footage is even more chilling given the fact that Jital's brother would later tell reporters that Jital didn't know how to swim. Jital's friends eventually made it to safety and regrouped, but Jital wasn't there. After searching for hours, there was still no sign of her. Even with the help of local authorities and responders totaling over 170 personnel, Jital Agnihotri remained missing through the weekend. Finally, on Monday, August 22nd, the search made the discovery everyone had been fearing. Jital Agnihotri was found dead after an intensive 4-day search. Her body was located 6 miles away from where she was first captured by the floodwaters. Jital's death was widely mourned, and her family saw an outpouring of support. As stunning a tragedy as this was, deadly flooding is something Zion National Park is more than familiar with. In fact, the National Park Service issues regular flash flood forecasts and advises visitors that, although summer and early fall is a great time to explore the Narrows, it is more dangerous because of the risk of deadly flash flooding. The deadliest to ever occur in the park happened back in 2015. The torrential flooding that occurred not only brought chaos upon the park itself, but throughout the surrounding communities on the Utah-Arizona border. It remains today the deadliest natural disaster in Utah's history. The flooding broke out on the afternoon of Monday, September 14, 2015. Intense rainfall eventually became more than the dry ground could absorb, and flash floods began permeating the entire region. In the city of Hilldale, 13 women and children were inside 2 vans that were swept away by water. Authorities would later find the mangled vans downstream, but with no people inside them. In Zion National Park, hikers in Keyhole Canyon were also consumed by intense floodwaters, the onset of which was only made faster by the narrowness of the canyon walls. 2 of the people captured in Zion were Steve Arthur and his wife Linda Arthur. Steve was a surgeon and a 21-year veteran with the Sheriff's Department in Ventura County, California. After the flooding disaster eventually subsided, authorities were able to locate the deceased bodies of Steve Arthur and 5 other people. But by Thursday, September 17th, they still had not located Steve's wife, Linda. Amazingly and horrifically, Linda Arthur's body was eventually found in a completely different area of the park, in a completely different stretch of the canyon that would normally have taken 7 minutes to reach by car. The area Linda's body was found in is called Pine Creek Canyon, and according to park rangers, it is a particularly difficult area to reach under normal circumstances. A National Park Service spokesperson described reaching Pine Creek Canyon as one of the park's more technical areas to reach. The fact that the flood brought Linda Arthur's body there is a testament to how powerful and how out of control it really was. In the end, 20 people, including 10 children, were killed by the flash flooding that struck southern Utah in 2015. For all its majestic beauty, nature is often brutal and violent. It can be easy to forget this in the modern world. But all it takes is one sneeze from Mother Nature, and lives are destroyed as her power is dramatically reaffirmed. Lest we end the story on such a macabre note, one positive takeaway from the Narrows in Zion National Park and the area's surprisingly dark recent history is that modernity makes safely exploring such natural wonders more viable than ever. But in order for this to happen, visitors must be proactive about checking the park website for forecasts, and should avoid traveling the Narrows at a time when there is a higher risk of flash flooding. Hopefully, by making this video and sharing these stories, some small contribution will be made to spreading awareness about the risks of flash flooding in Zion National Park, and perhaps preventing future tragedies. We hope you enjoyed this video and found it informative. Tell us, have you ever visited Zion National Park? Have you, or would you ever consider hiking in the Narrows? Feel free to share your thoughts and experiences with us in the comment section below. At 11,239 feet, Mount Hood is the tallest peak in Oregon, a U.S. state famous for towering snow-capped mountains. There's a decent chance you may have never heard of it until now. But if you had been anywhere near a TV in December of 2006, you would have seen almost nothing else. That's because in December 2006, Mount Hood in Oregon became the site of one of the more widely televised mountain rescue missions ever. The story was shocking, and as it unraveled live in front of millions, it also proved darkly mysterious. This is the story of the 2006 Mount Hood tragedy. The name Mount Hood first started appearing on TV screens around the country on December 10, 2006. That's when the news first broke that 3 experienced mountain climbers were trapped up on Mount Hood. One of the climbers, a man named Kelly James, had managed to call his family via cell phone. He had explained that he was holed up in a snow cave, and that the other 2 climbers, Brian Hall and Jerry Cook, had gone for help. Then the call ended, and nobody had seen or heard from any of the 3 men since. At this point, rescue crews went out to the base of Mount Hood to begin conducting a search, with media personnel right behind them. But it became quickly obvious to everyone that a search would be virtually impossible. A major winter storm had just broken across northern Oregon. Everything was encased in thick ice. Heavy snowfall continued day and night, and worst of all, violent winds as fast as 140 miles per hour were whipping through the area. All of this meant that you pretty much couldn't see your own hand in front of your face. And just as well, because if you could, you'd see it had been frozen solid. This gave rescue workers no choice but to wait until the weather cleared up. It also gave media crews no choice but to investigate the backstory while they waited for new developments. Who were these three men? What drove them to climb such a dangerous mountain? And what possible explanations were there for what might have happened to them? Brian Hall, Kelly James, and Jerry Cook, whose nickname was Nico, had met months earlier while climbing Mount Rainier in nearby Washington state. According to the LA Times, the trio bonded not just over the fact that they loved to climb mountains, but more specifically over the fact that all three were obsessed with planning. They all shared the same passion for designing the mission as well as executing the mission up the side of a tall mountain. Naturally, media outlets like the LA Times and others gravitated to this fact because it showed the men were all knowledgeable and experienced. It also suggested that they would have been highly prepared for the climb up Mount Hood, which only made their sudden disappearance even more mysterious. For such experienced and planning-oriented climbers, surviving a snowstorm, even a severe one, while out on Mount Hood is far from impossible. In fact, given their proclivity towards meticulous preparation, it seems, to me at least, pretty likely that the men would have known the storm was coming and planned accordingly. They would have planned down to the finest detail what food items to pack, what clothes to wear, which essential tools to bring along, and which to save weight by leaving behind. According to Kelly James's brother Frank, the three men had actually been emailing each other back and forth for months discussing the idea of climbing Mount Hood in winter conditions, a challenge that both intimidated and excited them. Despite their experience on other mountains, none had climbed Mount Hood before. The search. The storm raged on for days. The men's friends and family held on firmly to whatever hope they could muster. But as the rest of the world watched on, it seemed bleaker by the hour. Finally, on December 16th, almost a full week after the last contact with the missing men, the weather finally began to clear enough to allow a proper search of the mountain to begin. It was like opening the floodgates. Nearly 100 search and rescue personnel burst eagerly out into the improved visibility. Trucks fitted with snow tires, winter service vehicles, helicopters, and many brave workers on foot all fanned out and began scaling the steep slopes of Mount Hood. And when I say improved visibility, I do not mean great visibility or even decent. As some handheld footage captured by members of the Corvallis Mountain Rescue Unit shows, conditions were still pretty much blizzard-like. Even with the high number of people searching, it was still going to take a stroke of luck to find any trace of the men in such an environment. It took a whole day before workers finally found something significant. In the morning hours of Sunday, December 17th, a group of rescue workers were way up the mountain, just 300 feet or so below the summit, when they stumbled upon some abandoned climbing equipment lying in the snow. They found an insulated sleeping pad, some rope, and 2 ice axes. There was no way to know for sure if the items belonged to the 3 missing men, or if they had just been left behind by some other climbers at some other point in time. But it didn't look good. Making matters even more concerning, workers found the materials located in what they believed to be a snow cave. You'll recall that Kelly James, in the last contact he had made with the outside world, had told his family he was hiding out inside a snow cave. However, James and his fellow climbers were still nowhere to be found. That is, until a few hours later. Sensing they were zeroing in on the men, rescue workers began searching more attentively to the specific area where the climbing materials were found. At 3:29 p.m., they found Kelly James. The body of Kelly James was found in another snow cave not far from the one housing the salvaged equipment. Despite the fervent prayers of his friends and family, James had not survived the brutal storm, dying most likely due to hypothermia. At this point, the unfolding tragedy on Mount Hood became headline national news. On CNN, Wolf Blitzer gave the rundown of all the latest updates in the Situation Room. Anderson Cooper covered the story in minute detail, And Larry King Live also gave a spotlight to the dramatic saga. Fox News had Hannity and Combs covering the rescue attempt. NBC covered the story on The Today Show, and those are just a few examples. But even with the election-level coverage and an entire nation watching the slopes of Mount Hood from every angle, there was still no sign of Brian Hall or Nico Cook. Investigators spoke with the grieving wife of Kelly James, who was the last person to have spoken to James alive, and the last person to have received information about what was going on with them. That one phone call James had managed to make on December 10th was the best source investigators had at this point for finding clues so many days after the men had disappeared. Where were Brian Hall and Nico Cook? The clues. Phone records showed the call between Kelly James and his wife Karen lasted a total of 6 minutes and 42 seconds. Now, the fact that James was able to make the call at all was something of a stroke of good luck, given the remote location and the roaring snowstorm. Although it doesn't seem right to describe his situation as truly lucky. Through the howling, icy winds and spotty reception, James had been able to tell Karen that he was sheltering from the storm in a snow cave, and that his two companions had gone down the mountain in search of help. Heartbreakingly, Karen had told Kelly about the Christmas tree that they had just set up and how she couldn't wait for him to see how pretty it was when he got home. Investigators picked up on the fact that James had been left behind by his two fellow climbers as a major clue. It led them to believe that James must have been injured, probably in some way due to the sudden turn in weather conditions shortly after the group began their ascent back down. James also had marks on his body that were consistent with a steep slide down an icy surface. But now, James was the only one whose whereabouts could be accounted for. The two men who had left to find help down the mountain were, mysteriously, the ones who now could not be found. In addition to the phone call, investigators had another clue: a recovered camera belonging to Kelly James. The Hood River County Sheriff's Office developed the photos captured by the camera and found what they described as grim results. Photos the men had taken at the beginning of their climb showed that while they had brought the proper equipment, they looked like they had only prepared for a rapid ascent of Mount Hood. The group had apparently been planning to ascend and descend the mountain in just a day or two. This is something experts agreed was quite possible for three experienced climbers to do, but not if one of them suddenly got injured. The unexpected setback forced the men to try and weather the ensuing storm without the necessary supplies. The sheriff's office was now less optimistic than ever about their chances of finding any of the three climbers alive. Hopes were not lifted when, a few days after the discovery of Kelly James's body, weather conditions again worsened to the point of halting the search. It was at this point that local authorities made the difficult call of announcing that the mission was now in recovery mode. Brian Hall and Nico Cook were presumed dead. To this day, despite Mount Hood being one of the most popular mountain climbing destinations in North America, their bodies have never been found. Also remaining today are many unresolved questions about what really happened. Based on the available evidence, it seems clear that the group prepared for a rapid ascent, hit an unexpected setback in the form of an injury, and fell victim to a severe storm they hadn't planned on encountering while they were still up on the mountain. But what exactly caused Kelly James's injury? Did he fall? The men would presumably have been roped together as they made their way up and down the summit, so was he the only one to fall, or did the others fall with him? How long did Kelly James survive alone in the snow cave before he succumbed to the storm? Most pressing of all, where are the bodies of Brian Hall and Nico Cook? And how far down the mountain did they manage to make it before they too succumbed to the storm that was raging all around them? Without finding their bodies, we'll never know. And almost 2 decades later, there's still no sign of them. The tragic tale of Kelly James, Brian Hall, and Jerry Nico Cook both captivated the minds and broke the hearts of an entire nation back in 2006. But their story is more than a disastrous and ultimately slightly mysterious freak accident. It's also a cautionary tale about expecting the unexpected. As strange as it sounds, in the end, the men's high level of experience, the very thing that made their disappearance so shocking, may have been what led them to their demise. Because they were so familiar with climbing mountains and preparation, they spent considerable time carefully planning their route, planning their list of supplies, and envisioning exactly how their mission was going to go. And it seems like they didn't have a proper backup plan in case things somehow went wrong and they got stranded. This would have been an honest mistake that virtually any experienced group of climbers could have made. It is perhaps those with the most experience who are sometimes the most susceptible to these kinds of miscalculations. Venturing deep into a freezing cave, where every step forward means facing colder temperatures and growing dangers, John and Ralph, two brave young adventurers, dared to explore the mysterious Overholt-blowing cave in the heart of winter. What they faced inside was beyond anything they had imagined, testing their strength. As the cave's chilling grip tightens, will they find a way to escape? Watch the full video to find out what happened next in their thrilling and terrifying journey. Overholt-blowing Cave, a hidden gem in the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia. Caves are delicate ecosystems formed over millions of years, and they hold both geological and biological wonders. It's crucial to approach these natural wonders with respect and a sense of preservation, ensuring that they remain intact for future generations to explore and study. Caves can be incredibly dangerous for those who are inexperienced. They require the right equipment and knowledge to navigate safely. Overholt-blowing Cave is no exception. This cave is part of the Swago Creek Basin, which is the northernmost drainage area in the Greenbrier Karst region. It's a fascinating place with extensive underground drainage systems and some surface karst features. The Swago Creek begins at two large cave entrance springs, Overholt-blowing Cave and Cave Creek Cave. The Overholt-blowing Cave stream can be followed almost to the head of the Dry Creek Valley, but the upstream section of the valley diverts eastward to springs on the other side of the mountain. The Appalachian Mountains are home to many caves, but very few require several days to explore fully. Overholt-blowing Cave is one of those exceptional caves. Its entrance is not grand or imposing, standing less than 5 feet high, but it emits a cold breeze during the summer months that gives the cave its name. This entrance also releases a stream that forms the headwaters of Swago Creek. Although the entrance might seem small, what lies beyond is an incredible underground journey. The map of the cave, still incomplete, extends for 17 feet at a scale of 50 feet to the inch. Explorers must traverse nearly 3 miles of passages to reach the cave's currently known end. The journey includes a series of waterfalls that must be climbed from the bottom, making extended exploration trips of 2 to 4 days necessary. The story of Overholt-blowing Cave's exploration began in 1956 when 3 members of the Pittsburgh Grotto ventured into the entrance crawl, splashing through the stream to uncover the cave's mysteries. Since then, explorers have mapped over 2.5 miles of passages, revealing large rooms and breathtaking waterfalls along the way. Located on Spruce Flats Road in Buckeye, Overholt-blowing Cave is a captivating destination for experienced cavers. Its intricate passages and natural features make it a challenging yet rewarding adventure for those who are well prepared and eager to explore the depths of this remarkable cave. John Locke, 19 years old, and Ralph Bucca, 20 years old, were 2 adventurers with a thirst for exploration. They loved the thrill of discovering the unknown, and on a cold winter day, their adventurous spirits led them to the Overholt-blowing Cave in Swago Creek area, West Virginia. Despite the freezing temperature, which hovered around 0 degrees, the 2 friends were determined to explore the cave's mysterious depths. In 1967, February 25th, they packed their gear, including exposure suits, and began their journey. They knew the cave would be cold and wet, so they layered up, wearing slacks and long-sleeved shirts under their Air Force exposure suits. Over these, they added another layer of slacks and jackets, hoping to stay warm and dry. They wore hard hats and carried primary and backup lighting, ready for the challenges ahead. The cave's owner, Mr. McKeever, had warned them about the dangers of high water and cold weather, advising them not to enter. However, he did not forbid them, and their curiosity got the better of them. With excitement in their hearts, John and Ralph pushed forward into the cave. As they went deeper into Overholt, John and Ralph faced their first big challenge at the Dardanelles. This part of the cave was a tight crawl through a stream about 500 feet long, located 3,300 feet inside the cave. Here, Ralph's exposure suit started to let water in, making it difficult to stay dry. The suit was either too loose or had small tears, allowing the freezing water to soak in. Despite the cold starting to affect Ralph, they decided to keep going, eager to reach the mountain room. The mountain room was a spectacular sight. A huge column, 50 feet in diameter, stood proudly in the room, with a waterfall cascading down its side. John and Ralph admired the beauty, but knew they couldn't linger too long. They explored a few more passageways before deciding it was time to head back. As they made their way back, the cold became more intense. Ralph's hands and feet grew numb, and John's suit began to leak as well. At Lydia's lake, Ralph kept falling, and each time it was harder for him to stand up again. Seeing Ralph struggle, John kept encouraging him to keep going. By now, Ralph was completely numb and stiff, barely able to crawl the last 1,000 feet to the entrance. Around 11 p.m., the two friends finally reached the cave's exit. Ralph was exhausted and on the brink of unconsciousness. John knew he had to act fast to save his friend from hypothermia. With great effort, he partly carried and dragged Ralph to a nearby shed. There, he changed their clothes and cooked some soup, hoping the warmth would revive Ralph. Unfortunately, Ralph remained unconscious, so John rushed to find Mr. McKeever. Together, they carried Ralph to McKeever's house, where they worked tirelessly to bring him back to consciousness. After what felt like an eternity, Ralph began to wake up, though he was delirious. In his confused state, he accidentally burned himself on the hot stove, adding another layer of distress to the ordeal. 2 hours after they reached the safety of the house, Ralph finally recovered enough to talk about what happened. He realized how close he had come to being overcome by the cold and thought about their adventure. Overholt is a tiring cave even when the conditions are good, Ralph said. The combination of extremely cold weather and the failure of the suits to keep dry defeated us more than anything else. Their exploration of the Overholt Blowing Cave was a frightening experience, but it taught them important lessons about having the right equipment and being prepared. Ralph suggested that a stronger suit with a better neck closure would make the difference between safe caving and unnecessary exposure to the cold. Despite the dangers they faced, John and Ralph's love for exploring was still strong. They had faced death and survived, ready to take on their next adventure with new wisdom and respect for the power of nature. As they reflected on their journey, John and Ralph understood that the thrill of exploration came with risks, but their thirst for adventure would always drive them forward. Thank you for watching our video about this incredible caving adventure. If you enjoyed the story, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling tales. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Share your thoughts or similar experiences in the comments below. Until next time, keep exploring and stay safe.